Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Building Trader Confidence and Minimizing Fear. Good to see everybody. Let me know that you can hear me okay with a Y or a yes, if you would, in the question box. Perfect. Okay, everybody can hear me. Excellent. I see a lot of familiar faces here, and then some that are not so familiar. Folks I haven't had the pleasure of being with before. So welcome to the new faces, and welcome to the folks who've been here in some of my webinars and events in the past. Good to see everybody. Well, I'm pretty excited tonight because we're going to take a look at a large number of cutting-edge psychology and practical applications of that psychology to trading. And it has personal relevance for me as well, not only because I'm a psychologist and a trader, but I had to overcome my own fears of the market. And many of the things in this webinar tonight are things that at least I tested out. Now, I'm teasing you a little bit on that. Certainly, I've tested out, and I've worked with others on, and a lot of these have been also the subject of clinical trials in psychology, excuse me, or research of some sort. So I think you'll find a lot of valuable information in this. We have an awful lot to cover, so I want to just get right into it and get going. KK says that he can only make it for the first 30 minutes. He's over in the Far East. Hi, KK, good to see you. And no worries, we are recording, and I did put the recording on, so I know that it is recording. I've forgotten to do that in the past, but this time I haven't. If somebody would be so kind to let me know at about 8:30 my time, about an hour and a half from now, let me know what the time is, and I'd like to take a break at that point. All right, let's get going here. One of the things that got me interested, aside from my own trading, is this question that SFO, Stocks, Futures, and Options magazine, had asked back in the summer of 2008. They asked they asked their readers, which emotion is the toughest for you to control when trading? Hope, fear, or greed? And I'm assuming that we all know what the answer is, or have at least a good idea of what that answer is. And it's fear, of course. In fact, they published this in the August issue of SFO, and fear was cited 2.5 times as much as hope or greed. So this poll confirms what I find as a trader and as a trading psychologist, which is that fear is a very common experience, and a common experience for almost everybody. It occurs frequently, not just across all traders, but throughout traders' lives. And certainly it is, as SFO found out, difficult to control. Well, you're going to find that I don't believe for one moment that we can ever really control our emotions. So kind of stick that in the back of your mind, because that's going to be a big part of tonight. We do try to control things all the time, and we've been brought up that way, especially us here in the West. We've been brought up that way since childhood. But I want to introduce some things to you tonight that may be a little bit challenging for you to kind of grab a hold of and wrap your mind around, but I will ask you to have an open mind, because some of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be very different than I think the way in which you've approached this in the past. So with that, let's go into this in some depth here. Mark Douglas, in his book Trading in the Zone, identified 4 primary trading fears, and I think he's pretty much right on the money here in terms of what these are. He talks about the fear of being wrong, which I think is a really big one. It's all about ego and our ego getting hooked. If I'm wrong in a trade, well, what does that say about me? something that we don't talk about much because it is the psychological side, but I think it's very important in trading. It's something to acknowledge. Douglas also talks about the fear of losing money. Well, no one likes to lose money, right? Of course not. It's painful to lose money, but it's a part of the process. We really can't escape that, although we try very hard to do so. The fear of missing out. That leads to overtrading and is certainly an important fear. And the fear of leaving money on the table. I didn't make as much as I should have. And those fears, the fear of missing out and the fear of leaving money on the table, actually have a strong tendency to affect our next trade. We might leave a trade on longer, or we might start jumping into trades if we felt like we've missed out or we've left money on the table. And these are the ones I hear a lot, especially, the fear of losing money and the fear of being wrong, but certainly hear the other two as well. There's a lot of ways really to trigger fear, and if you really think about it, and I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've read Douglas, but if I remember correctly, he also views hope and greed as being alternate forms of fear, maybe, kind of the flip side of fear, if you will. Holding on to a loser, for example, is a good expression of hope, hoping it's going to rally back and come to break even, right? And this is partly the fear of being wrong and partly the fear of losing money. I'll hold on because I'm afraid of taking a loss and I want to be right. So hope, has at least a little bit of fear associated with it, and so does overtrading or greed. That's the fear of missing out, isn't it? Or it could even be leaving money on the table. I'm fearful I won't get it all. So being wrong, losing money, missing out, not getting all the profit, all of these are fear-based, and even hope and greed can be a part of that, and all affect our behavior. So knowing those fears, I'm sure we've all felt at least one of these in the past. Here's the question. Here's an important question. It's a basic question, but it's an important one, and I'd appreciate it if you type in your answers here. What do you all experience when you experience fear? What are the types of things that occur to you, that happen with you when you're fearful? What kind of things go on with you when this happens? Anxiety, yep, that nervousness, right? We have that feeling of fear. Hesitation, there's a good one, right? I notice that I start to hesitate. I start to get not willing to make the commitment. I get into a fog. My mind goes into a fog. I start to lack confidence. I feel like I'm going out of control or losing control. Excellent, excellent. Let's just take a look here at what happens a little bit more deeply when we're fearful. And I do this because it's really, really important for us to know when we are feeling fearful. I know it sounds sort of silly because, we probably all know what it feels like pretty well. But the more we're aware of what we might call signs and symptoms of fear, the better able we are to catch it early before it has a chance to really take hold. So that's kind of important. And being aware, knowing how our body is feeling and how our emotions are running and how our thoughts, what our mind is saying to us, knowing those things are important, because if we can start to catch it early before it really freezes us up and causes that fog and that loss of control, then we have a chance of catching that. Okay, so what happens? I view fear as sort of having a global effect on us. In other words, it affects our mind, body, and our emotions all at the same time. Mind, we get racing thoughts, right? Or we go into that fog. But racing thoughts often happen with people. They start to ruminate about maybe a trade that's going bad, or as Sandra says here, believing that the trade will fail. And that might go on and over and over and over again, those thoughts that our mind is having. And we can't stop thinking about it. What happens here is we get what we call high cognitive activity. Cognitive activity is just another word or a fancy term for thoughts. And thoughts and cognitive activity, if we break it down even further, is just what's the mind saying to us, our self-talk, if you will. Well, we know, and we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later on, that elite performers have low cognitive activity. So fear does just the opposite to us when we are under its influence. It starts to elevate our thinking in terms of our frequency and the intensity of our thinking, and that has an effect on our trading performance. Well, maybe the easiest way to identify fear is in our body. I know that when my shoulders start to get tense and kind of rise up, and it's almost like I've got, my shoulders are into my ears, if you will, then I know that I'm under the spell of fear. So muscle tension, an increased heart rate, the clammy feeling in your hands, right, or trembling hands. Sometimes we get that cotton mouth or that queasy stomach. All of that, by the way, is related to the fight or flight response, which we'll talk about in a moment. And for good reason, too. But just knowing that those symptoms or those signs occur is useful for us. And, of course, feelings. And feelings can range anywhere from a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of nervousness, apprehension maybe, all the way over to the other side of the spectrum where we feel terror, real fear, real strong fear. And those feelings can be really strong. All right. Question here by Len, I think. Let me move this over so I can see. Yeah, by Len. Athletes just react automatically. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's not true. Athletes struggle with this as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later tonight. But a good question, Len, and we'll get to that. So what happens is, and we're going to talk about this too, is that we actually learn to fear the market, especially after a series of losses or bad trades, and that creates all kinds of problems. We're going to get to that in a moment. But what's really happening here is that when we feel that fear, when we feel those sensations, when our mind starts to race, what this is really is a triggering of the fight-flight response. And this is an automatic response that helps us deal with threats. It's part of our evolutionary heritage. It's part of our genetic makeup. Back when our ancestors were roaming the jungle, a flash of orange out of the corner, seen out of the corner of their eyes, would immediately put them into, I'm either going to fight this saber-toothed tiger or I'm going to run like crazy to get away from it. It was a survival response, and it's been, it's one of the things that have kept us as a dominant species on the planet. And it's still useful. If you step off the curb and you're not aware, but a truck is all of a sudden barreling down the road and you catch it out of the corner of your eye, it's that fight or flight response that automatically pulls you back onto the curb. You don't think about it. You don't even, your heart's racing and you feel it afterwards. But at that moment, it's that survival mechanism kicking in. And so when the mind is racing, what's happening with our symptoms of fear in terms of the fight-flight response is that our focus is narrowing here onto the feared object. We kind of lose the broader perspective and we start to narrow in and only look at one thing. That's one of the reasons why the mind keeps going over and over again, I'm going to have a losing trade, I'm going to have a losing trade. The body begins to pull blood out of the extremities, which is why the hands get clammy and cool, and certainly, sorry about that, and certainly out of the stomach, which is why we get, when we're facing the saber-toothed tiger, the body doesn't want to be digesting food or thinking about food. It wants to be, focused on fighting that thing or fleeing it. Interestingly enough, the blood actually drains out of the cortical areas of the brain, the thinking areas of the brain, the planning areas, what we call the executive center. Why? Because the body doesn't want us to be thinking about, doesn't want us to plan an attack here. They want us to either fight. It wants us to either fight or get out of there. And so blood goes into the limbic centers of the brain, or the emotional centers, because that's a more primitive center, and we can act quicker based on emotions than we can if we have to plan it and, compare and contrast alternatives and decide the best course of action. So all these things that go on, and that's one of the reasons why we feel the stress as much as we do. So all these reasons are really kind of hardwired and programmed into us. Unfortunately, they're happening when we are trading, or even if we're working in a corporate, environment, and we don't like the boss, and the boss comes in, and we have that, anxious feeling with the clammy hands and all of that fight-flight response. It still happens there. Our bodies don't really discriminate between major threats and non-major threats all that well. So when it's left unchecked, it obviously becomes toxic to our trading. It leads to a lot of erratic behaviors that we'll talk about, and it leads to poor trading results. No doubt about that. But it also, by the way, has an incredibly poor effect or negative effect on our health and our self-esteem, as we'll see tonight. And everybody experiences this, and it's important just to understand this as we go along. So this is what I call the vicious cycle of fear and stress. And this is what I said, we get this learned fear of the market after a series of losses, or even one significant loss. It can happen in one shot here. We begin to, naturally so, we begin to fear the market. It's not a surprise that starts to happen. Once we start to fear, that stress or fight-flight response, the stress response triggers in, and we get all of those symptoms. And then we start to get crazy trading behaviors, erratic trading. And it's a vicious cycle that continues really without interruption unless we take positive steps to interrupt it. And that's the purpose of this webinar tonight. But it will go on and on and on until eventually the trader either blows up their account, or they burn out. Okay? We're going to talk about how we can break the cycle. But before we do, let's take a moment and just talk a little bit about how traders try to deal with this thing called fear. What are some of the things, and if you would be so kind, I'd appreciate it if you type in some of the things either you have tried or you would think that other traders would try. I'm not going to try to, identify you with things that you've tried. Just some of the things that you might have tried or other traders might have tried to try to cope with, or, and I put this around quotes, quote, control, end of quote, the fear. What are some of the things? Distract myself, try to look at the big picture, positive self-talk, make those trades, force them, I'm going to take them no matter what. That's pretty good. Take some deep breaths and stop trading for a day or two. Read some self-mastery books, go to seminars, journal. Okay, good. Run up and down the stairs, that's a good one. I like that. I haven't thought of that one before, Jock. That's really good. Work out, yep. Flip out, right? I've heard people cry before, say cry. Now, how well has this worked for you all? Just say really good, okay, so-so, not so good, never works at all. Let me know all these different things. Not good, so-so. One person says good. When I trade smaller, it works well. Not so good, so-so. Only for a short time. Nope, not at all. I still get afraid to trade. Yeah, okay. When I look at this, there are basically three major ways that I think traders try to cope with fear. They try to avoid, and we're going to look at each one of these in a little bit of detail here. They try to avoid losses, work to improve the technical side, and then exercise mental or psychological control. Right? I think if we look at all the things that people said, we could probably put those into these categories. Okay, one of these three categories. All right, let's take a look at each of these in turn. When we think about avoiding losses, I immediately think of loss aversion, which comes from prospect theory, which actually was developed in the 1970s by two brilliant psychologists who actually won a Nobel Prize for this work. It's called loss aversion, and basically what it means is that we again, sort of like the fight-flight response, we have probably a genetic bias in our mental machinery, in our brains, where people have a significant aversion rather, to loss when they're making choices that involves uncertainty or risk. Okay, this is straight out of behavioral finance. But it probably comes from, you've heard the expression, at least we would hear this here in the West, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush, right? Well, that's loss aversion right there. It's better to lock in that sure gain early on when we can, rather than try to hold out for a larger win, right? But that really leads to cutting winners short. And it really, it relates again to the fear of losing money and the fear of being wrong. If I can lock it in, then I am satisfying my desire to be right, and at least I'm avoiding loss. It's also why traders like the high win-loss ratio trades. If I said to you, I've got a trade setup that has a 90% probability of winning, and I have another trade setup that has a 65% probability of winning, most people would say, gee, I'll take the 90% one, right? The correct answer on that, by the way, is not necessarily 90%, nor is it 65%, but it has to do with your expectancy out of it. It depends on how much you're winning each time you're winning. If you're having huge wins on that 65%, it can overshadow anything on the 90% win-loss ratio. But nevertheless, people still like high win-loss ratios. Traders are just happy when they're right more frequently. And again, this relates to the fears of losing money and being wrong, right? And loss aversion also relates, sort of in a paradoxical way, holding on to losers too long, hoping not to take a loss, trying to avoid that loss. Again, just not wanting to have that loss come up on their balance sheet. And all of this is fear-based. When they do the psychological, when they've done the research, they've done this over and over and over again on all kinds of different, in all kinds of different ways. And they come up with this ratio. They say that loss has about 2.5 times the psychological impact of a gain of the same size, or loss is experienced on a magnitude of 2.5 times a win. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, if you have, say, if you have a winning trade and it wins $1,000 for you, that feels pretty good, right? Well, if you have a losing trade and that loss is $1,000 as well, it doesn't feel like $1,000 was lost. Psychologically, it feels like $2,500 were lost, not 1,000. So loss has 2.5 times the psychological impact, right? So we tend to favor high win-loss ratio trades, maybe at the expense of really looking at what expectancy is. We tend to cut winners short, and we tend to hold on to losers far too long and not being willing to take the loss. So all of these are totally inconsistent with sound trading practices, but almost everybody does it when we're locked into the fear and anxiety that that can happen in trading. Todd asks, who's the name of the writer of Risk Aversion? It's Kahneman and Tversky, and I think they published their first work in the late 70s. I want to say 1979. They published a series of stuff. Todd, if you're really interested, drop me an email and I'll get you better citations. All right, so that's loss aversion and probably hardwired because we've done better by hanging on to one bird rather than going after two in the bush. All right. But often our first response is, when we're in an uncertain situation, is to look for more information. Now, this assumes you have an edge, but more and better analysis doesn't really solve the problem. It's a form of what we call confirmation bias, which is seeking additional information in the face of uncertainty that would support, pretty much what we already know. So for example, a classic example would be let's say you have on your charts an RSI and it's giving you a signal, however you have that configured to work. It's giving you a signal to take a trade. Well, you see that, but you say, well, I'm not sure. I'm going to check the MACD before. And so you end up checking the MACD, and then you say, well, okay, I got two signals here. Let me look at the stochastics too before I take that trade. None of that really helps, okay? And here's a really interesting study that was done. And it was done on horse bettors, horse race handicappers, parimutuel bettors. And here's what they did, and I'll use the chalkboard here a little bit. They did a study of they did four different trials here. And they started off with 5 pieces of information. And by the way, all these horse bettors, all these handicappers were experts in their field, and they were professional parimutuel bettors. Okay? So they started off in the first trial with 5 pieces of information, and then they doubled it in the second to 10 pieces of information. Things like the condition of the track, the past 3 months of race results for the horses, their fastest win, all the kind of data that you might look at when you're thinking about betting on horses. I've never really done it, so I don't really know. But so they doubled the information in the second trial. In the third trial, they doubled it again. So they started with 5 pieces of information. Now they have 10 pieces of relevant information. Now they have 20 in the third trial, and by the fourth trial, they doubled it once again, and they gave them 40 pieces of information. Now, interesting, isn't it? Note here that the red line, they made bets, they placed their bets, but their accuracy did not really improve. The red line's flat, isn't it? But they also measured, because they're psychologists and they're smart people, they also measured the degree of confidence that these people had, these expert horse race bettors had in their bets on each trial. And this was the average level of confidence. So notice, confidence goes up, right, with the pieces of information, but it doesn't do anything with accuracy. Okay? Accuracy was just as good here at 5 pieces of information as it was when they had 40 pieces of information. And yet, people became more confident. Okay? They were able to, confidence is sort of the flip side of fear, right? And so it's natural that we will have this tendency to look for more information, but additional information beyond what's necessary for our edge is really quite deceptive, because you risk becoming unsoundly overconfident when you do that. So you can imagine, for example, I've got 40 pieces of information. I can look at the stochastics, the RSI, the CCI, and the 310 oscillator, and God knows what else, right? And all of them are giving me a go. I'll put half of my account on. I can increase my position size. That's the kind of risk we run in doing that. That's one of the obvious risks. Okay, so looking for the holy grail, or looking for better ways to analyze the market, or better indicators, or what have you, is not likely to solve the problem of fear. And this is a really good example of why this is true, and the risks that we run in trying to do so. Another way, as we said before, coping with fear, traders try to cope with fear, is to exercise psychological control. We try to fix the anxiety, right? Have you done these? Have you suppressed thoughts, tried to suppress emotions? Have you said, okay, I'm going to engage in positive self-talk. I'm going to get greater willpower and discipline. My gosh, I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to be more disciplined. I'm going to force myself to do better. I'm going to use imagery. I'm going to change my thoughts. I'm going to change my mental imagery, right? I won't even think about fearful thoughts. Have any of you tried this sort of stuff? Have you all found it? Some of you have, yeah, some of you have, right? And how effective has it been? Well, and some people say, yeah, I've done those things and more, and they don't work, right? They don't work. Here's the paradox of trying to control your thoughts. And I look at the blogs on the internet, and I talk with traders, and I talk with even people who should know better, and they all say, yeah, you got to control your emotions. Here's the paradox of that. When we try to control or suppress our emotions, we're kind of telling our mind, okay, we don't want fearful thoughts or emotions, so stop it, right? Now what happens is that our mind actually starts to scan for them. And when it finds them, it brings them up to our attention to try to solve them, right? So what's happening there is we are increasing the same kinds of thoughts and emotions that we don't want to have, because we've kind of given the brain the command to go ahead and find these things. So anytime there's even the slightest anxiety or the slightest apprehension or the smallest doubt in your mind, it's going to bring it up to your attention and start magnifying it and making it bigger. Okay, so and when we do, we have this rebound effect. When we try to suppress, we can sometimes suppress it for a period of time, but it's always only temporary. And then when the brakes are let off, we get what we call a rebound effect, which means that it gets even larger. The fear is even larger. Okay. But even more so than any of this, even more so than the fact that it doesn't really work, trying to control and fix it doesn't really work, even more so than the fact that it actually creates, in many cases, more thought. And remember before we said that elite athletes have less cognitive activity, and here we're creating it. Okay, even more so than that, the key thing here is that it's causing us to be distracted from what we should be paying attention to, the trading task that we're supposed to be focused on. okay? If we're focused on trying to enter a trade and we're having scary thoughts and we're fighting those scary thoughts and feelings, then we get distracted from a good entry, don't we? Or if we're in a trade and we're having scary thoughts about loss or that the trade might go against us, it distracts us from being able to focus on what the price is doing, what our indicators are doing, and what really will tell us whether this thing is going to go against us or not. So that's the key thing here, is that when we try to suppress or control our emotions or our thoughts or our sensations, our bodily sensations, any of those internal things that are going on, when we try to control them, it has a negative effect across the board, but the big one is this right here. It causes us to lose focus on what's important to us, the trade. Okay? All right. We're going to talk more about task-relevant focus as we get into this more. I want to introduce it a little bit here now, but try to keep this in the back of your mind. And what we mean by task-relevant focus is just focus on the actions or the behaviors that are under our control and that relate to good trading. Okay? All right. Here's some homework for you, a suggested assignment. I shouldn't even call it homework, but a suggested assignment. You need to really answer two crucial questions about fear. The first is, what specifically do you do to cope with fear and anxiety? And how well has this worked? These are really important. Our natural tendency is to want to fix the problem, control those emotions, stop those thoughts, but we know it doesn't work. And you need to know this too. You really do, not just on an intellectual level, hearing me tell you or reading it on one of these slides. You really need to work through it to understand it on an experiential level. You've got to really sit down and think this through and kind of list out all the ways that you've tried to cope with this, and then figure out how effective it's been to be able to really give up what's pretty much culturally ingrained in us that we can fix. All of psychology, I'm talking about cutting edge stuff here now. Most of Western psychology is still trying to fix emotions and fix and repair thoughts. We have whole traditions in psychology that try to do that. And the truth is that the outcomes, the results of that, working with clients and patients, ain't that good. This is stuff. This is new research over the last 20 years that's pretty robust and pretty, it's really kind of changing the landscape of psychology. So you're seeing it here, maybe for the first time. So one of the things that we know you have to do is to really kind of work this through for yourself. And in your workbook, I've included two useful forms that you can use to do this. And there's two parts to this. I call them action item number 1 and action item number 2. What you want to do is create an inventory of how you deal with your fear. So you can go through either, going forward and starting tomorrow, and when you get a fear response, you write down the situation, okay? Or if you can go back in time and think about it, you can do that too. But I saw a clear test after a sign of strength. This is actually somebody's example. It's somebody who traded the Wyckoff or VSA method that I do. So they wrote down that situation. And what was their experience of fear? Well, they had muscle tension, tingling hands, some of the same kinds of responses that we were talking about earlier. Numb feeling, I wasn't even there, kind of in that fog, right? What was the coping strategy? Well, I wound up not taking the trade. And what was the effect? I felt immediate relief. because I got rid of the fear. I avoided, I sidestepped the fear, right, which is a big problem here. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So I felt good relief, but then the market rallies and I wasn't on board and I felt really down, like I'd never get good at trading. How many have had that experience? We can all raise our hands to that. So what were the costs of that? Well, I lost out on a big profit and I missed the opportunity to make a good trade. Okay? So go through and just kind of lay out your experiences of fear and then what you did to try to deal with it. Okay? And you're all individuals and your answers are going to be varied. They're going to vary widely, which is why I can't tell you. I can give you the basic ideas. I'm going to show you some examples, more examples in a moment. But again, you really have to do this for yourself. So fill in this form for a few days and get very clear on what you're doing to cope with fear and how well it's working. Okay? And then part 2 is taking the coping strategies that you identified earlier on the first part, the first form, and now looking at the costs and the benefits of using these strategies. And I'd like you to look at the costs and the benefits in 2 ways, both short-term and long-term, for both costs and benefits. Okay? So here's a couple of examples here. They noticed that they had a pattern of not pulling the trigger. Well, short term, the cost of that was they missed a profit and they felt kind of bad about themselves and about themselves as a trader. Long term, the costs were that it kept them out of many good trades. And they said, gee, I'm not really learning or improving, and I really do feel like a loser here, like I'm not going to make it as a trader. Okay? When we look at, short-term versus long-term costs. Then looking at the benefit side. Short-term, well, truthfully, I didn't feel so anxious right after I didn't pull the trigger. When the trade left, I felt relieved, right? Which happens with a lot of folks. Long-term benefits, they couldn't actually come up with any. And just to make this complete, another example, they cut the winner short on a trade. The costs were the trade went on for 5 points, but they made 3/4 of a point. They felt very frustrated. Again, same kind of thing. They're not doing what they need to do as a trader. And again, it relieved the fear, but in terms of long-term benefit, it's really working against them. Todd says, where is the link to get your forms? Todd, I sent it to you in an email. If you didn't get it, drop me an email and I will be sure to get it to you. But it should be in a PDF file. I sent it out to everyone, and Sharma the same thing. And if you didn't get them for some reason, let me know and I'll be sure to send them to you. So often when I do this, I have traders do this, sort of real time, go off in a corner for a half an hour and do this, but we don't have time to do that. But here's how some other traders in a couple of different seminars that I've done, here's some of how they reported coping with fear. And if some of you will notice some of the things that you said here earlier on. And these are actual responses. Distracting myself. Trying to suppress my thoughts and feelings. Change how I think with positive affirmations and self-talk. Try to talk myself out of fear and anxiety. Can you imagine that? You're trying to take a trade, or you're in the middle of a trade, and the coping strategy that you use is to try to talk yourself out of the fear that you're having. How well are you going to be able to focus on your trade? Of course you're going to have poor results. This is where erratic trading comes from. People read self-help books, tried to educate themselves about it. They've taken medications, herbal supplements, vitamins, ginkgo biloba and all of that other stuff. They've used alcohol afterwards. You really get down to it and they feel really down and frustrated and stressed and everything, and at the end of the day they just want to go have a beer or two. You can't blame them, because it's, beer is pretty effective. There's other people, it's not what I recommend, by the way, but it certainly does have a pretty quick effect. Other people would join a chat room, or they would, one person actually said that they kept a little charm on their trading desk. Other people use relaxation. Some folks were saying deep breathing and stuff, which is not a bad idea, by the way. Deep breathing is good. Study another trading book, look for other indicators. You get the idea. You can see how all of these are ways that people cope, and you may do some of the same thing. You may have other things that you use to cope. The important thing is to know what they are and to write them down and really think about them, and then think about what the costs and the benefits have been. And you can see this again is what other traders have said about the costs and benefits of their fear management strategies. They missed taking perfect setups. They canceled out orders and missed good trades. They lost thousands in profit. They said, another setback to sticking to my rules. Boy, does that sound depressing or what? Another setback in sticking to my rules. I lack balance in my life from all of this. This is serious stuff, what happens here. I don't trust my system. I lose confidence in myself. My self-image is diminished, and I feel like a failure. Gee, this is the cost that people talk about in terms of strategies they are using to deal with fear. These are not good strategies, and this is why you need to do this for yourself. You really need to experience this yourself. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to get off the dime. In other words, hard to do some of the things I'm going to suggest that you do. Okay? When they looked at benefits, most would say, I got the relief from stress. I didn't have to confront my fear. Wasn't that a great benefit, right? I stopped the stress, but not for very long. The next trade it came back. Some people got really, strident about things and said there was absolutely no benefit except avoiding dealing with the fear. No long-term benefits that I could see. And this is a composite of a bunch of seminars that I've done, but this is consistent across the board for what traders will say. So costs are extremely heavy, and the strategies don't really produce much benefit. Okay? So not something we want to continue to do. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. You want to do this yourself and be very clear about what hasn't been working, because the solution of the fear isn't going to be in finding any of the holy grails or the avoiding the losses or trying to control the emotions that we're seeing everybody tries to do, and naturally so. Okay. All right. So I want to dive right in here. What is it that makes this thing called fear so difficult for us? If we're doing all of this stuff to try to solve it and we're not having any luck, why is this not helpful? And I don't want to show that slide, actually. Sorry. Why is it not helpful? Well, in general, anxiety and fear are viewed, at least here in the West, probably less so in the East, but I think it's even there too. It's seen as a major obstacle to our life. It's entrenched. People who are successful don't have fear or anxiety, right? That's what we think. It's not true, but that's what we think. It's very entrenched, and we all buy into this. Madison Avenue, all the advertisements on television. You never see an anxious or a fearful person selling a car, do you? No, of course not. It's in our culture. Too much anxiety is bad. You can go through and, big boys don't cry, men don't get fearful, buck up, all of those different sayings that we have. Now look, I want to kind of give you little bit of a warning here because we're going to talk about things that may be, as I said in the beginning, kind of hard to get your mind around, but try just to be open-minded about this. As I said before, this is cutting-edge stuff. It's not conventional wisdom. It's not psychology today kind of looking to fix your fear. We don't need to be fixed. It's an important point here. We really do not need to be fixed. We're just stuck. We're not broken. We're stuck in a negative pattern, in a pattern that's not producing. We keep doing all these things to solve the fear, but it's not producing the solutions we want. That's being stuck. It's not being broken. Okay? And I'll try to show you how to get less stuck so you can do the things that are important to you, the trading tasks that we have to do. All right. 4 main factors. Something for why we get so ensnared in fear and anxiety. Something we call fusion, evaluation, avoidance, and reason giving. And notice the acronym spells fear, so we can remember that easily. I'm going to go through each of these in detail. Okay. My slides got a little out of kick here. Okay. Fusion. What does that mean? It's a weird word. Well, it's when people see and believe what their mind is telling them as if it's the truth or reality and something that they feel compelled to respond to. In other words, it's treating thoughts as if they are exactly what our mind says they are. Another way to think about this, it's a kind of a cute acronym, or not cute, pretty wonderful acronym in a way. It's false evidence appearing real. Okay, and then we act on that false evidence. So fear and suffering with the fear is set into motion when you feed unpleasant thoughts and feelings by getting what we call fused with them, by believing them. Okay? Let me give you an example here of what I'm talking about. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You certainly don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it's kind of a good experience, and no, it won't embarrass you or make you upset in any way or anything else. It's just a way to understand what fusion is. Just put both feet on the floor, your hands on your desk or on your lap, whichever. Take a deep breath and just close your eyes for a moment and stay with my voice. Just listen to my voice and imagine me in the room with you. And you see me standing before you, and in my hand I have a small yellow fruit. In fact, it was just picked off the tree, and it's very, very ripe. And you can see that it looks nice and yellow, and it looks, even from appearances, quite ripe. And I take this yellow fruit, and I set it down in front of me on a cutting board. And I take a kitchen knife out, and I slice this fruit in half. And juice flows all over the cutting board. And if you thought that I had a lemon in my hand and that I cut that lemon on the cutting board, you're right, it is a lemon. And you can almost smell the scent of the lemon from where you sit. And now imagine this in your mind's eye. Try to be clear about this in your mind's eye. I take half of that lemon and I hold it up, and I hold it above your head, and I ask you to open your mouth, and I squeeze the lemon, and all the lemon juice flows into your open mouth. All right, you can open your eyes. How many of you puckered up when I said I squeezed the lemon? How many could almost taste that lemon? How many of you actually salivated? Yep, some folks are saying, yeah, saliva was coming. Yep. This is fusion. This is a very good example of fusion. We're believing what I'm telling you. Now I'm acting as your mind here, giving you words. There was no lemon. I wasn't in the room with you. I wasn't holding it over your heads, but I got a physiological response from you. And I'll bet many of you could actually see the lemon in my hand or kind of envision me in the room and stuff. Somebody says my eyes squinted. This is fusion. And this is a significant problem for us because we set our fear into motion when we start to believe what our mind is telling us as if it's true or reality, and as if we must respond to them as if they're saying what they say they are, rather than just what they really are, which is just thoughts and memories, words and sensations. So here's a key idea here. Thoughts are thoughts. Sensations are sensations. You don't need to become them, okay? And your mind might be saying right now to you, yeah, well, when I get into a trade, I'm afraid, and that's real. It's not fake, right? Okay, so here's a question for you. Have you ever had a trade and your mind says, look, you better get out of this trade. You got to exit because it's going to go against you and you need to exit. And so you do. You get out. You cut that winner short, right? And then the trade goes on and makes a good profit. And your mind now says, well, if it's my mind, it would say to me, idiot, why didn't you stay in that trade? It went on and made all that money. So here's the question. Which one of these was false evidence appearing real? Which one of these was true? Well, if you think about it, the unfortunate fact is we take both of those as true. We take the idea that the market's going to go against us, so we better get out, and we cut the winner short. And then we believe our mind saying to us, why did you get out? You're stupid to do that. You're an idiot to do that. Why did you do that? And we feel bad, even though our mind just told us seconds ago or moments ago to get out of that trade, doing exactly the opposite of doing exactly what it told us to do. And then we feel bad about it. So that's an example of fusion, getting out of the trade, believing the mind that it's going to go against you, and then it doesn't, and then believing the mind that we were wrong to believe it in the first place. Now, with a mind so inconsistent as that, how can we always believe it? And this is one of the things that we will talk about more as we go along. But your mind tells you to go out, get out of the trade, and it's going to lose, and you do, and then it says you're an idiot for not staying in, and you feel bad. You treat these thoughts as if they're real, not as if they're just thoughts. You're treating them as if they're reality when they weren't reality. Neither one of them are reality. Right? Here, look, what if you had the thought, I'm a banana. I am a banana. Did having this thought turn you into a banana? Obviously not. Is this thought any more true or any more false than any other thought your mind might throw at you? Now or then or later? Thoughts are different than the things that they describe. And your mind generates thoughts constantly. We're going to talk about how we can step back and diffuse and disentangle from our thoughts. But when we fuse with our thoughts, when we believe them, it's then natural to want to avoid the anxiety that we feel. All right? the fear that we have from our thoughts and our feelings is clearly uncomfortable. And we want to get rid of it. We want to escape it. Okay? We get into this cycle, this vicious cycle, where we enter a trade. We start having those thoughts about loss, or how the trade's going to go against us. We fuse with them. We believe them. We buy into them. It triggers that fearful stress reaction. If our mind's saying we're going to have a loss, that's not good, and we get that, all the sensations and feelings that we have in our body. What do we want to do with it? We want to get away from it. We want to escape it, so we cut that winter short. And it gives us nice temporary relief. We get that honeymoon, right? A brief honeymoon from it, and it's great. But it's also highly addictive because it works. It gets rid of this fear. All of a sudden, the fear becomes precedent. It becomes the main thing that we're dealing with, not the trade. We're not dealing with the trade anymore. We're dealing with the fear. This is what we mean by trading our emotions. And so we trade out of them. We cut the winter short and we get temporary relief. Well, what does that lead us to? Short profits for sure, but it's really erratic trading. And our trading skills stay limited. And we do this over and over and over again. And what happens? Our response becomes, I get in a trade, I feel the reaction, I can't stand it, I got to get out, I cut the winner short. And then that becomes, we are limited. We don't think about how do we manage the trade. We're thinking about how do we get out of the trade. All right. So Sandra says, but what if your thought comes out to be real? What a great question. Yeah. And so this is why I say, Sandra, you have to go back and really kind of look at the way you've coped before with the stress and the fear and see if that's worked. Sometimes it's going to turn out right. A stopped clock is going to be right twice a day. The blind squirrel finds a nut occasionally, no question. But if you're finding that you're consistently, avoiding the experience because you're fused and believing your thoughts and trying to escape the fear, that's going to be more potent and more important. Part of what makes fear such a problem is evaluating our experiences. We're always evaluating, and usually we're evaluating, we're comparing and contrasting. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I fearful? Am I calm? It's what the mind does. And there's nothing wrong with evaluating. It's natural and it helps us in many things, but it's not so great when we turn it against ourselves, like saying, stupid, how come you got out of that trade? Don't be such an idiot. Okay? That's really unhelpful. That's very unhelpful to us. When we're buying into and feeding our negative evaluations, we're kind of fueling this struggle that we have with our emotions unnecessarily. We're harming ourselves when we evaluate and buy into the evaluation. It's like we get hooked with this, like a fish on a hook. It's almost like you can't, it makes matters worse, and you struggle and you struggle and you struggle with this. So it's important to begin to notice when you're hooked and struggling and to back off of it a little bit. And I'll show you some techniques on how to do that. One of the ways you can notice being hooked is when tension shows up, or when fear shows up. Notice if you feel like you're on the end of a hook, like a fish. Reason giving is also a big part of it. We naturally give reasons for our actions. Fear and intense anxiety are good reasons not to do something. And we make up reasons all the time. It's another thing that the mind does for us. It's almost like I can't go or do this because I might get or feel or think that. I can't stay in this trade because I think I'll have a loss and I'll feel bad. I can't pull the trigger because I'll feel bad about myself if I have a loss. So we give reasons for our experiences, and these put some emotional discomfort between us and doing what's important. And this is the key thing. It's like, I can't take this trade because I can't take the fear. I have to exit early because I'm crawling out of my skin. So if I can't take the loss because, I can't stand it, then I'm going to have to first take care of the discomfort before I can do what we want. All right? So if I want to trade well, and this is kind of a reason we give ourselves, if I want to trade well, first I have to deal with the fear. I have to get rid of and get control of my fear. And it leads us into getting trapped, into making the discomfort go away. And again, our focus goes to our emotions rather than to our trades and what's important to our trading. Okay? So when we're evaluating our experiences, we're usually evaluating ourselves. And when we're looking at reason giving, we're finding ways to avoid pulling the trigger or avoid staying in the trade or struggling with our emotions and saying to ourselves, I can't deal with this until I get rid of the fear. So in kind of a stepwise fashion, we can see as trade setup occur, we turn inward and become self-focused on our beliefs and the fear response. We're not focused on the market, but we're focused internally on ourselves. We feel, because we're so internally focused, everything is magnified. All our feelings are magnified, and we feel like we have to escape and get relief. So maybe we don't pull the trigger. And then we get down on ourselves. We start saying, oh, I'll never be a good trader. It's never going to happen for me. We get hooked by our negative evaluations. And then we say, if I can't get rid of this fear, then I've got a problem in trading. And this is what I start to focus on. We place fear and the kind of dysphoric feelings that we have about all of this between ourselves and our trading. And our focus now is completely on emotions. Our trading skills never get developed, and the aspiring trader ends up either burning out or quitting trading. And not surprisingly so. This is really tough. All right? Any questions on this at this point? I know I'm going kind of quickly here. And it will be a good idea to review this. But the idea here is that fusion, believing what our mind is telling us, carte blanche, as if it's telling us the truth, seeking to get rid of the fear, trying to control it, struggling with it, and then ending up escaping it, evaluating ourselves as not great traders, not good people, having problems, and so on and so forth because of all of this. And then saying to ourselves, I can't deal with this until I get rid of the fear. All of this is why fear is so problematic for us. And we're going to naturally, it's natural then that we try to escape this. But the problem, it becomes that we shift from focusing on the task of the trade onto our self-focus, onto what's going on internally. So yes, it is being, I got a question here, is this being recorded? And it is being recorded, so you'll be able to hear this again and review this again. So here's a quick little model here, and kind of an idea that I'd like to present for you. We get into a trade. We see now that our thoughts and our emotions and sensations start to get triggered. And if they're fearful ones, and scary ones and unhelpful ones, it leads us to unconstructive behavior. Pulling out of the trade quickly, holding on to a losing trade because we don't want to have a loss, and so on, that we've talked about. So in a way, coming into the trade is what we call the stimulus, right? You all have heard of stimulus response before, I'm sure. And we enter the trade, and it seems almost automatically that all of this stuff starts to happen, and we're out of control of it. So there's the stimulus of the trade, entering the trade, and then the response that we have, our thoughts and our sensations and our emotions and our behavior. Well, what we want to do here is we want to widen the gap between entering the trade and our thoughts and sensations and our behavior and our actions. We want to cultivate a mental space here so that we're not trapped in these negative thoughts and feelings. Okay? All right. We can begin to widen this gap between taking the trade and the fear response by understanding the kinds of thinking traps that we fall into. And this is the beginning of doing the opposite of fusion. This is the beginning of what we call diffusion. Falling into these thinking or these mental traps occurs because we become fused with them. And then that leads to the fear response and what we could call emotional hijackings. Okay? It's getting hooked like that fish. When we fall into those traps, we get stuck on the hook, and we're not taking actions that matter to our trade, that are important to our trade, or to us as traders, what we call high-value actions. Okay? So knowing what these thinking traps are and becoming aware of them is the first step in both avoiding fusion and avoiding emotional hijackings. And I think I detailed these out in your workbooks, and I'll go through a couple of them here, but only a couple, I think, because I want to focus on some other things as well. So one common trap is thinking that my thoughts are true and reflect reality. We just talked about that, didn't we? You fall into this trap when you think that your thoughts reflect the actual event rather than just your thoughts about it. And as we've been talking, many of our thoughts are simply thoughts. They're opinions and judgments and evaluation. It's just your interpretation, not necessarily truth or reality. So again, for example, you enter a trade and your mind begins to tell you that your trade won't work out and it's going to become a losing trade. This is just simply an opinion, just simply thoughts, right? If you see that the market is turning against you and you say to yourself, I can see the market is turning against me, I better get out, that's different. But if you're in the market and you're responding just because of fear and you're believing your mind, then it's because your mind is fallen into this trap that everything that what you're thinking must therefore be true. If you're thinking it, it's true. My thoughts are to be followed, the third one on the list. Okay, just because you think something doesn't mean you have to act on it. Many of us feel compelled to exit trades or cut winners short prematurely because our mind is telling us to do so. So again, all thoughts are not true, many are just opinions, and some are really silly and work against our better interests. For example, if you're on the highway, right, and somebody cuts you off, we'll take it outside of trading for a moment. If somebody cuts you off and cuts in front of you, well, you're going to be angry and your mind is going to say, I'll fix that guy, I'm going to catch him and I'm going to cut him off, and then I'm going to do 15 miles an hour in a 65 mile an hour highway. Okay, so those are hot thoughts, but we don't have to follow them and jeopardize, maybe ourselves and the passengers in our cars and break all kinds of laws to do it, right? Well, it's the same thing in trading. We can have the thoughts that I better get out of that trade, but we don't have to follow them, okay? Scary pictures are real, another good one. We often create scary scenarios that we buy into, and we make them seem real, you know. A trade will turn into a loss. I had one trader who saw images in his mind of any time he got into a trade that he was going to lose, and he could snowball this into the scariest thing ever, that he, you know, saw himself as a failure. He'd lose his relationship with his wife. He was unable to pay the home mortgage, and he was going to be flipping hamburgers at Burger King. You know, that's pretty scary, right? But they're just images. They're just coming out of a stress response, and you know, that those kinds of things start to magnify and make it difficult. So I'm not going to go through the rest of these in the interest of time, but there they are. And in your workbook, I've encouraged you to, again, become familiar with your own scary thoughts, your own way that you see the kinds of thoughts that you see as true in reality, and some of the other traps that we can fall into here. And in your workbook, there's instructions on how to do that. It's a very useful thing to do to begin to understand what our thinking traps are, because our natural response to fear is, you know, brings about these kind of traps, and it brings about at the same time inflexibility. We never question them. Because of fusion, we buy into them, and we start to have only one response. Well, we've got to cut that winner short, or we can't enter that trade. We want to broaden our responses. We want to be able to manage that trade. We want to be able to move our stops instead of cutting our trade short. We want to be able to find the right entry instead of failing to pull the trigger. We want to be expansive in our options that we can do in trading. We don't want to be limiting ourselves, but our thinking traps cause us to limit ourselves. So we can keep ourselves stuck in very unconstructive behavior patterns unless we begin to know what traps we fall into and the situations that lead us into those traps, and what those traps look like, what the mind is saying to you. So do the exercise in the workbook. And that's a good exercise to do. And again, it's giving you more self-awareness, which I think is really important. All right. Knowing the common thinking traps and how they relate to you is an important first step, okay, in what we call diffusion. In other words, seeing our thoughts as thoughts, seeing our feelings as feelings, not as truth or reality, not as scary pictures which are real, not as things that we have to obey and carry out, okay? But we need to do more than that. And keep in mind, we want to be able to defuse from our thoughts. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is to decenter, to, here, do this for a second. Take both of your hands and interlace your fingers in front of you. And now bring them up in front of your eyes. And it's, try to look through the open spaces between your eyes. This is looking through your thoughts. This is being fused with your thoughts. And it's hard to do. It's hard to see what's really going on out there, isn't it? Now, unlace your hands, and whichever your dominant hand is, right or left, take that and hold it out at arm's length. And cup your hand as if you're holding your thoughts there in your hand. This is what diffusion is. Being able to hold our thoughts out at arm's length and to be able to look at them for what they are, not necessarily what they say they are. When your fingers are interlaced and right up against your face, it's hard to see through your thoughts. You can only see, it's very hard to see through your thoughts. They're blocking a clear picture of what's going on in the world. Holding them at arm's length, however, gives you a chance to see your thoughts as what they are. And then we can focus on the trading task at hand, the high-value trading actions that we'll talk about. Now, mindfulness, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on mindfulness, promotes diffusion. It's a key skill. It's a key mental skill in diffusion. It promotes awareness and task-focused attention rather than attention on your internal state. But it does much more than that. It cultivates that mental space that we were talking about a little bit earlier between the stimulus and the response. It begins to widen that gap even more for you. It's good to know the traps, but now we can kind of look at them real time and widen that gap. So mindfulness is a process with which you can develop important new mental skills, things like personal awareness and diffusing from the things that the mind is saying to you. It's kind of a new way of thinking, and it takes time to learn. And developing this, our personal awareness of our mental and emotional states through mindfulness, begins to allow us to deal with our overlearned and automatic behaviors that aren't working for us. All those things that we've been doing to deal with the fear, and start to replace those with more functional actions, okay? So we replace a focus on scary thoughts and feelings with a focus on the sound trading tasks that we have, or what I call high-value actions. Again, what we're saying here is that our mind doesn't always reflect reality, and it's causing us to act against our own best interests. And mindfulness is going to help us distill this. And it does so by helping us notice the internal process from a distance. We can decenter from our thoughts and our feelings. We can place them out at arm's length so we can look at them and decide, are they helpful to us or not so helpful to us? And mindfulness also helps us out because we can, even if we get distracted by those thoughts, and we will, we can refocus on the trading task at hand. So self-awareness here is a crucial skill to develop, and mindfulness practice is really the best way to develop self-awareness. So mindfulness is all about noticing what your mind is saying to you and accepting what is being said and felt as naturally occurring events that aren't necessary to control or alter. Very different than mindlessness, right? When we're kind of mindless, when we're fusion is mindless, it's being mindless. When we're fused, we're accepting what's being said as reality and truth. Mindfulness isn't saying that. Mindfulness is, let's see, they're saying close any unused. Hang on just a second. I'm getting some negative things here from, a little negative thing from GoToWebinar. So I just want to close this down a little bit. Okay. Everybody's still there? Just give me a Y or a yes. Let me know that you can still hear me and that we're still going here. Okay, good. Sandra asked a good question. Is mindfulness the same as meditation? It comes out of that tradition, Sandra, but we're not talking about it in a spiritual sense. Usually the Buddhists and the Hindus will talk about this, and the Zen practitioners talk about this in a spiritual sense. Very akin to that. And we're gonna do a little exercise in mindfulness in a moment, but a little bit different than that too. We're just looking at it more as an attentional skill, more so than anything. Being able to focus on the important task because we're not being distracted by what the mind is telling us. It's a very different way of thinking about things. Okay. So the basic goal here is changing this. I want to trade well, but I can't because I'm afraid or I'm feeling bad, right? We want to be able to say, I want to trade well, and I do have negative feelings, and I do have negative thoughts. And mindfulness paves the way for this, okay? But it's practice. It's, it's like going to the gym. You don't sign up because you want to get fit and you walk into the gym, and as soon as you step in the door, you don't say, I'm fit. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of focus and a lot of work to do that. It's the same thing with mindfulness. I'd like to be able to say that it's quicker than that, but unfortunately I can't. Let's do a very brief mindfulness exercise, if you're willing. Show you what it's all about, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll take a quick break, okay? All right, so again, your limbs uncrossed, sitting comfortably in your chair with your back straight, okay? And your hands either on your lap or resting comfortably in the arms of your chair or on your desk, whatever's comfortable for you. We don't need to get in any special posture or position, just whatever is comfortable. Take a deep breath in and let it out, and as you do, just press your feet gently into the floor and really feel that firm support under your feet. And as you do this, take another deep breath and let it out. And as you're exhaling, just let your shoulders drop in a very relaxed manner. Take another deep breath, and on the exhale, gently let your eyes close. And if you can, sense the gravity flowing in you, keeping firmly grounded and secure. And as you begin this mindfulness exercise, become aware of that part of you that is always able to notice and always able to be aware of everything you do and everything you see and hear and touch and taste and smell and feel and especially think. Just become aware of that part of you that can observe all of this going on. And take another deep breath, if you will. And as you exhale, bring your awareness to your breathing. Now, there's no need to try and control your breathing. Just let it flow naturally. And just notice the inhales and the exhales sliding across the very tips of your nostrils. Place your focus on your breath coming across the tips of your nostrils. And you might notice that the air coming in through your nose is a little cooler than the air coming out, because when it comes out, you might notice it's just a little bit warmer. See if you can notice this. And acting like a scientist, try to detect the exact moment when the air begins to come in through your nose and the exact moment when it goes out. And now, if you're willing, I invite you to undertake a challenge for the next few minutes. And the challenge is to keep your attention on your breath, observing it as it flows in and out, in and out. Now, this can be hard because your mind may try to distract you. It may tell you all kinds of stories to try to grab your attention and pull you away from what you're doing. Just see if you can let these come and go, just like passing cars on a roadway, and just watch your breath. Just keep your attention on noticing your breath flowing in and flowing out. Now, you might notice how easily your mind tends to slip off its task of focusing on the breath. That's okay. There's nothing else to do right now except watch your breath. This is the whole point of the mindfulness exercise, to notice when your mind has wandered and to bring it back to the breath. From time to time, your mind will succeed in distracting you, and it will get you interested in one of its stories, and you lose track of your breath. This is very normal. Nothing to worry about. It happens to everyone, and it will happen repeatedly. The moment you realize it's happened, just acknowledge it. You can even pause to say to yourself, thinking, and gently return to your breath. Just notice the breath. Let thoughts come and go like passing cars on a roadway, and focus on your breath. And one last time, as you return your attention back to your breath, allow your breath now to deepen a little. And keeping your eyes closed, begin to reorient to the room you're in. Expand your awareness and notice your body on the chair, your arms and legs, your neck and your head. Notice any sounds around you. Wiggle your feet and your hands. And as you become fully present to the room and as you begin to open your eyes, take a moment to realize that there is a part of you, your observing self, that notices everything you do and everything you think and everything you feel. It is this part that will help you to be mindful. And as you open your eyes, just check in for a moment and note how you feel, and note the state of your mind and the clarity of your mind. Okay? That was an example of mindfulness. So what did you think about this? How was this? Did you find your thoughts wandering around all over the place, thinking about what you were going to have for dinner maybe, or a trade that you had problems? Did you find difficulty staying on task? Were you trying to prevent the thoughts from drifting? Yeah, lots, right? Yeah. How about, did you feel bored? Anybody feel bored? Anybody say, how long is this guy going to make us do this anyway? This is ridiculous. You don't have to answer that. Was your mind telling you that it wanted you to do something else besides sit there and watch your breath, that boring thing? Yeah, every now and then, right? These are all normal responses and certainly not problematic in any way. Right? Just notice that your mind is constantly going, and it has difficulty staying focused. And it's the same thing in trading. And when we start to add a little bit of emotion behind it, my goodness, the mind starts really moving, doesn't it? And it does try to distract you off of the trading task at hand, just as your mind told you stories and distracted you off of the focus of your breath, right? Here's a question that's come in. Thoughts kept banging away, but then became very easy to be in rhythm. Yeah, that happens. Good observation, Mike. That does happen. This stuff takes practice, and you want to actually do this exercise when your mind is telling you something different and not viewing it as undoable because your mind is wandering. You certainly don't want to, kind of give up on it because of that. In fact, struggling with this, it's kind of a new idea for many people, and struggling a little bit with mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness is probably something that you have to do. Some important things about mindfulness, and by the way, before I do that, there are at least 2 and probably 3 scripts for mindfulness in your workbooks. And there's also a freebie on my website that you can download, a guided mindfulness. But the best thing to do is to kind of learn to do it yourself. Just sit quietly in a comfortable position. Start to focus on your breath. It's an easy thing to do. If you want to focus on an object, a visual object, you can do that too. But just, keep your attention on one thing. And as your mind wanders, keep Keep coming back. As you practice this, you're going to find that mindfulness helps you to develop an immersion in the moment, a present awareness, staying in the present. It really enhances our ability to recognize distractors for what they are and to be able to refocus on what's important to us. We were using the breath as the object of focus, but the trade, the price action, what the indicators are saying, what the volume is doing, that's also an object of focus, is it not? And that's what mindfulness helps us to do. Focus on that and experience the mind when it's telling us stuff, when it's saying things to us, as well as when you get good at this, the discomfort of the fear. Mindfulness helps us recognize in the moment that these things are temporary, that even the feelings are like passing cars on a roadway, or people walking along a city street and we're walking the opposite way. We pass through, scores, if not hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them. We don't have to embrace every single passerby on the street that we meet, do we? Well, it's the same thing with our thoughts. We don't have to engage every one of the thoughts that we have. Okay, we can keep focused on the high-valued actions that are the tasks of trading. Let me just say a couple of things about what mindfulness isn't. It's not a form of relaxation or positive thinking. Although it does promote both, and especially relaxation, it's not geared to changing your thinking. And it doesn't create a trance-like state, and it's not about hypnosis, and it doesn't promote a blank mind or anything else. Again, the goal here is not to change or escape negative experiences. Just be more conscious of these experiences and be more aware of what they are, not what they say they are. And doing the mindfulness practice helps us decenter from them. And it can be hard to see this. Our minds may still be, this distinction that it's not relaxation and that it's not positive thinking and it doesn't, change our thoughts, because our minds may still be angling for that fix or that solution. And as I say, they can really lead to relaxed mental states and certainly reduce the cognitive noise, the thinking in our head. And your mind's going to try to latch on to that. And just notice that for what it is. Just notice that for what it is. It's more of your mind saying something that isn't. Okay? All right. So, people say that thoughts pop up into their heads. That's natural. This is the point. These thoughts are always going to be with us. I'm going to give you an exercise on writing down some of your negative thoughts and carrying them around with you as a metaphor to show you that these thoughts are always with us, and there's no need to make any effort whatsoever to make them go away. We know, and you will know for sure through your own experience when you do that exercise of the cost benefits of all of that, we know that efforts to make thoughts go away don't work. Mindfulness does work. It's a real difference here, and we can view mindfulness when we're mindless. A simple way to do that is our minds and our bodies are in different places. I can call up a nice time in a Paris cafe, but I'm sitting here in Connecticut where I live in the United States. But yet my mind can easily go over to there. Well, I'm imagining or reliving some past event, but my body is here. So I'm not mindful, right? I'm not in the present moment. I'm somewhere in the past. Or if I'm projecting some future, like a future loss, then I'm in the future, but I'm not. Mindfulness is always grounded in the present. We're present focused when we're mindful. The present is where life is, and the present is especially where our trading lives are. Okay? All right. Here's a question for you. How many times in the past hour has your mind wandered off? You're sitting there in front of your computer screen, but maybe your mind is on a bad trade, or maybe it's on what's for dinner, or that street-side cafe in Paris that I mentioned, or some other place. Mindless mind is always in the future or the past. And our body is always in the present. So it's one of the reasons why we use the breath, because it's a function of the body. It's one of the reasons why I started to ground you into pressing your feet into the floor and feeling the gravity. You can use your senses to ground yourself in the present. Okay? And, you know, when we're present focused, it's a step way into the zone. And we're going to talk more about the zone here as we go on. Is it being in observation and not having an opinion about your observations? Bryant, that's a good observation, in fact. That's a good thought. Yes, it's being able to observe without being able to, John Kabat-Zinn says it's being purposeful without judgment, you know, staying focused on in the present, on purpose, and without opinion or judgment. Yeah, I'm too good to let your mind go elsewhere. Yeah, Sharma, you need to get your mind to do that. You can use the guided stuff, but I would encourage you to really begin to develop this on your own practice. And, you know, practicing for 5-10 minutes a day is a great thing to do. It's really informal mindfulness or formal centering. We can't diffuse, that is, see what the mind is saying just as temporary thoughts and what the body is feeling just as transitory temporary emotions. Think about the most fearful time you had trading, and now think about today. Are you still fearful? No, of course not, because now it's different. Fear doesn't last. Thoughts don't last. Somebody estimated we have 60,000 thoughts in a given day, and that's an awful lot of thoughts. They don't last. It's hard for us to maintain focus and concentration on any one thing. So just recognize, and mindfulness really begins to get you to see, gee, all these stories that the mind tries to get me to jump in on instead of focusing on the breath. That's the idea, to begin to get clear about that, okay? And so when we can begin to be mindful, then is when we have that mental space between the stimulus and response. We can decenter from what the mind is telling us, at least long enough to recognize that it's occurring. And that can be everything, especially in trading. So what the mind says and how we respond can be really quick and automatic, right? In fact, we call them automatic thoughts. In our experience, we see something and wham, our mind kicks in. We've got fear, we've got emotion, we've got all of this stuff. Mindfulness promotes a greater awareness of what is going on as it's going on, and it starts to slow things down. You often hear of athletes who are working in the zone, you know, a baseball pitcher or a batter, for example, saying, I can see the ball really well. The ball slowed down. The game slows down. And that's what happens when we get pretty good with mindfulness. But again, regular practice is necessary. And when we're talking about, use just a graphic about mindfulness. When we get, you know, a good practice of mindfulness going, it leads us to begin to develop self-awareness. And this breaks the automatic process, of immediately responding to what our mind is saying. We begin to hold those thoughts and those feelings at arm's length when we're mindful and self-aware, okay? We begin to cultivate that mental space that allows us to do that and allows us to decenter and defuse from what the mind is telling us. Again, when they're out at arm's length, we can examine them. We can engage that observing self and observe them and see them for what they are, and then refocus or regulate our attention to the demands of the trading situation as needed. And what's that going to do? It's going to help us expand our trading skills and our repertoire. Instead of just closing down trades prematurely, we hang on to them longer. We trade. We actually become traders. So we develop more confidence and more success in trading. We get to be a better trader through this. Okay? So quickly, just places to be mindful. Just in a quiet area where there's no distractions. Just do it for 5 minutes a day to start. Work up slowly. You know, there's several exercises in the workbook. Do it in the shower. I find my mind just goes crazy in the shower. I think it's the ions in the water. So try to be mindful. Focus on your washing yourself, right? Washing the dishes. In fact, there's a nice exercise in washing the dishes. How about when you're talking, with your spouse or your significant other? Really focus in on what they're saying. When the mind wanders off and you want to respond, right? You want to give them a counter argument. Be mindful. Notice that. And then, as hard as it may be, because you really do want to make that counter argument, go back and focus in on what they're talking about. Okay? Certainly in trading, how about the next 10 minutes? See how mindful you can be. Make it a challenge to focus in on this stuff for the next 10 minutes. Okay? So this is the goal. Noticing how thoughts, feelings, images, memories, sensations are not really controllable, but are just thoughts, feelings, images, memories, sensations, and not a whole lot more. We can be mindful when we're studying and annotating charts, when we're logging in our trades, when we're writing in our trade journal, when we're preparing for the next day, when we're reviewing this video, when we're making trades. Just notice when your mind starts to wander. If you're studying your charts or you're doing your journal, just notice when your mind starts to wander and bring it back to the task at hand. And when you notice that your mind's starting to wander, notice whether you're doing something of value or is your mind taking you off into some distraction somewhere. And notice after practicing this for a while, if your concentration doesn't improve, see if it doesn't improve. See if you don't see more things more clearly. See if time doesn't go more quickly, especially when you're in mindfulness practice. See if you don't put yourself into the zone, okay? And let's take a quick break here. 5 minutes, no more, because I've got still, it feels like a ton of information to convey to you. Yeah, Jose, thanks for reminding me. 5 minutes. I have, let's see, 8:53, so 8:58, 2 minutes to 9 my time. Let's come back and we'll get into this, and we'll talk a little bit about how mindfulness and this relates to the zone, because it does in a very real way. All right, see you in 5. Okay, I'm back. And we'll keep going here because it looks like we're going to wind up running a little over. Hi, Ron. Yeah, we're doing the recording, so you'll be okay. Okay, so we talked a lot about mindfulness and did some mindfulness, and the skills here are really connected into being in the zone, what the athletes have called being in the zone. Helping to, keep folks their attention focused and poised. We'll talk a little bit about what poise is all about, without the need to control these experiences that we have. So the practice of mindfulness helps us develop the ability to allow these naturally occurring experiences to come and go as passing temporary aspects of our experience, like the cars or the people on the city streets. But also at the same time, it helps us maintain a focus on the task at hand. That's the whole key here with mindfulness. It helps us to reduce those, keep attention on what's important and not get help, and helps us avoid jumping into the things that create problems for us, which is struggling with our thoughts and our feelings. All right. Athletes have this ability, and the zone comes from working with athletes. And elite athletes have negative thoughts and negative feelings and fear, just like you and I do. They get uptight before a major game, but they don't focus on this. They've trained themselves so that their focus is on their game and on their game plan. They're not focused on controlling jittery nerves. They're focused on what are they going to do when they get on the field or on the court. I like to quote Tiger Woods. Here's a quote from him, and I know he's had some difficulties, but he's been one heck of a golfer for an awfully long time and considered to be one of the very best in the sport, maybe in the history of the sport. Here's what he says: the challenge is hitting good golf shots when you have to do it when the nerves are fluttering, the heart is pounding, and the palms are sweating. That's Tiger Woods talking. And he's talking about when he's in front of a major event and he's got to, do a chip shot or a good drive or whatever, and his nerves flutter, his heart pounds, and his palms sweat. But he can stay focused. He's trained himself to do that. Do you all remember here's an extreme example. You all remember about a year and a half ago in the springtime, a plane took off out of New York, out of LaGuardia Airport in New York, and they ran into geese, and they had to land it in the Hudson River, right? Well, the next day, or a couple of days later, after that heroic landing, they had the captain, the pilot of that aircraft on one of the morning talk shows with Katie Couric, and his name was Captain Sullenberger, and she said to him, "Oh my God, it must have been incredible. You must have been afraid. It must have been terrifying. Were you worried about all your passengers? You had 140 people on the aircraft." He says, and he was a guy with few words and kind of slow speaker. He says, "Well," he said, "Katie, I figured that the flight crew was taking care of the passengers." And she said, "Well, you must have been so afraid. You must have been so nervous. It must have been so terrifying. Were you praying?" she said. And he turned and he said, "Well, Katie, I figured other people were doing that, right?" And he said, "Listen, the physiological reaction to this was strong, and I had to force myself to use my training." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, I felt the fear," basically is what he was saying, the physiological reaction. We talked about all the sensations of the fight or flight response. Imagine what that must have been like, knowing that he was, a hair's breadth away from killing himself and everybody else on board that aircraft. And what did he do? Well, he explained to her, and you can Google this, it's probably still on the internet. There was it's pretty instructive, actually, to see this. He said, you know, my focus was on leveling the wings, checking the airspeed, making sure the nose was up and the tail was down, whatever the, you know, the tasks of landing that plane were. He had the fear. There was no doubt about it. Just like Tiger Woods has fluttering nerves and pounding heart when he's got to make an important shot, this pilot had that fear, and both of them focus on the task at hand. That's what being in the zone is. It's not this notion that these folks never have fear. It's not this notion that they don't have negative thoughts or anything like that. They all have them. But they, you know, have learned either through their own experiences or by working with sports psychologists and keeping their mind in the, they call it mind in the moment. It's the same thing as so we're really talking about the difference between a self-focus, focus on your internal state, your thoughts, your feelings, your body sensations, the images coming into your mind, all of those things. Focus there versus focused on a task, leveling the wings, checking the airspeed. Right? You could focus on the fear. You could start praying to try to alleviate, you know, the fear or whatever. I shouldn't say it that way, but or you focus on the task. Self-focus leads to negative performance. I mean, you know, you can think about this. If you're focused on yourself, which is what you're focused on when you're focused on the things that your mind is telling you and the feelings that you're having when you're in a trade, it's going to lead to negative performance, negative trading results. When you can focus on the task, it's going to lead to positive performance. And efforts to think better, feel better, be more positive, all that stuff, all hinder it. Because, why? Because you're focused on yourself. This stuff here, trying to think better, feel better, have better self-talk, control your mind, it's all leading to a self-focus. It's not leading to the task, which is what we really want to be focused on. Okay? So we know that controlling our fear and anxiety and our thoughts doesn't work. We need something different. Right? We need to start thinking differently, and mindfulness begins to help us do that. We need to get our heads out of our ways. The goal here is not to remove the cognitive activity, not to remove the thoughts and the feelings, but to remove their effects from our trading. And we know control isn't the answer. I don't know. I've been practicing psychology for 16 years, and I've worked with people with mental disorders, traders, musicians, athletes, writers, all kinds of folks in performance, and with mental health issues as well. And I've also certainly known lots of people who, we would call them great performers, people who achieved a lot in their life. I have yet to meet one person who can consistently control his or her feelings. I have not met a single person who can do that. If you do know of somebody, please send me an email. I'd like to meet this person. I could probably do an interview and get published and win the Nobel Prize or something. It doesn't exist. Okay, Tiger Woods couldn't. Captain Sullenberger couldn't. Even though he was a hero, he still landed the plane anyway. And that's really what our job is here: is not to try to control our feelings and our thoughts, but to land our own planes anyway. Okay, so it's really the struggle here to be without the distress that causes the problem. I told you this would be kind of a hard thing to get your mind around. But struggling with our thoughts and our feelings causes us the problem. We're trying to avoid it. We're trying to escape it. And we're trying to control it. And that creates the erratic trading and the problematic trading. Okay, I want to go through some suggestions for you for some exercises and techniques that you can do here, and some methods above and beyond mindfulness. Let me just say that mindfulness, first and foremost, is the key thing to do. Above all of these others, that is what's going to help you most. In my experience, I think that's going to help you most in being able to minimize the effects of fear on your trading. Notice I say minimize, and I put that in as the title because, again, we can't control it, right? Okay, so first of all, do the exercise in the workbook on the thinking trap and be able to identify when you are thinking in a trap-like way. Okay, when you're believing your thoughts as true, when you're creating scary images and believing them, when you're saying I've got to follow them, and the other ones that are in that workbook. Doing this begins to develop awareness, and you can begin to recognize your thinking traps, for what they are, not truths, but traps, and you can do it quickly. Remember we talked a little bit about automatic thoughts, how thoughts happen so quickly, like the snap of a finger, that they just they just pop right into your mind. Well, I'm trying to encourage you to become more aware of your thoughts through mindfulness, and then to notice when you're falling into a thinking trap. So you can slow down that automaticity. You can stop that automatic thought and slow it down. And when you do that, by identifying the trap that you're falling into, you're all of a sudden deconstructing that thought. You're all of a sudden decentering from it. You're being mindful about it, not just buying into it for what it is, but just in the process of identifying the thinking trap, you're already starting to hold it out a little bit at arm's length, okay? In your workbook, there's also an exercise called labeling your thoughts. Sounds silly, but believe me, this has a good impact on folks when I prescribe this. I had a writer once that I was working with. He had writer's block, a really nice guy, and very well respected in his field, and he was trying to produce a book in his area, and he was just having a devil of a time. And so I assigned him, I asked him to do this exercise, this labeling your thoughts exercise. And he called it the thought game. He called it the thought game. He was clever in the way he used words. So you can think of it as a game. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Have fun with it. Here's the thing to do, and it's written up in your workbook, so you can just go there and take a look at it too for a little more description. But just sit quietly someplace and let where you're going to be undisturbed. Take a walk if you want to, and just let your thoughts flow. In fact, it's kind of fun to take a walk, and as you're walking, you'll have thoughts. And instead of let's say you had a feeling that was sad, you remembered something and you felt sad. So instead of saying to yourself, gee, I feel sad, notice it. Just like in mindfulness, when you notice, when your mind drifts off, notice the feeling, and instead of saying, I feel sad, say, I am having the feeling that I'm sad. Or if you have a remembrance, an image that pops into your mind of, say, that the cafe in Paris, right? The sidewalk cafe. Instead of writing that memory and seeing myself in the cafe, tasting the cafe au lait and hearing the sounds of French being spoken around me and seeing the sights on the street, instead of engaging that and jumping into that memory, just pull back a little bit and say, a memory. I'm having the memory of the Paris cafe. Okay? Again, the idea here is to begin to disengage yourself from your thoughts and your memories and your feelings and your sensations. You can do this for urges too. Disengage them from them, decenter from them, hold them out a little bit at arm's length. Okay? Now, those are two things that are fairly straightforward and fairly simple to do. On the scale of potency, I would say they're sort of small potent. They have good effect, but their effect is going to be small. It's not like it's going to change anything. And remember, we're not trying to change your thoughts from negative to positive. We're not trying to change your feelings from negative to positive. What we're trying to do is separate yourself from your feelings and your thoughts and your sensations a little bit, okay, so you can see them for what they are, temporary, fleeting, and things that you don't have to buy into. Now, there's a few other exercises and techniques that you can use, and I'm going to jump into some of these. Engaging your observing self. We did a little bit of that. I invited you in the mindfulness exercise to call upon and notice that part of you that can notice everything, right? That's our observing self. Here's a little quick exercise on this. You're sitting there in front of your computer. Can you, right this moment, can you kind of see yourself maybe from the corner of the room, looking at yourself, watching your monitor and listening to my talk? Can you do that? Can you kind of pull yourself and sit yourself over in the corner, even though you're here sitting in your chair in front of your monitor, your computer monitor? Can you place yourself over there and see yourself looking at your monitor? Most of us can do this. And you don't have to do it crystal clear and crisp and sharp. It's just the sense or the feeling. Well, that's your observing self. You can also observe yourself having thoughts while you're listening to me, or you can observe, your observing self would notice the pressure on the backs of your thighs, on the chair that you're sitting on, or the press of your back against the back of your chair while you are listening to me. That's your observing self. Okay, so when you are in this sort of overwhelmed view or overwhelmed feeling where you're having, painful memories of a loss and thoughts that you can't shake this and you want it to stop and you want it to stop now, and you've got these feelings that are anxious and tense and you're keyed up and you've got gripping fear and you're feeling sick to your stomach and your hands are sweaty and your heart's palpitating away there, and you feel I can't pull the trigger, and I got to move my stops wider, and I've got to hold loose, and all of this stuff is going on together. Engage your observing self and begin to break this stuff down a little bit. Separate it. This is just a useful technique. Kind of categorize. What thoughts am I having? Go through this. What thoughts am I having? What feelings am I having? And what actions am I having? Instead of having it all jumbled together like this, separate them a little and focus in on only one thing at a time. Get present with your thoughts. Get present with your feelings. Get present with your actions. Okay? It's a very useful technique that helps you begin to distance, especially, right here, it's like when we interlaced our fingers, it's like right up in your face, and it's hard to get. This is pulling it out a little bit and stepping back, engaging your observing self, separating your thoughts and your feelings and stuff. This is the mindful view. Your observing self is like, it's kind of like having a coach that can observe your thoughts, separate from your feelings and separate from your actions. Okay? Separating all of this stuff helps you to see them more clearly. And you can begin to deal with them more mindfully and more effectively. Okay? You can say, okay, these are just thoughts that I'm having. These are just feelings. Let me do what I need to do, what's right here. Okay? Here, that's a technique. Here's another technique. It's called informal mindfulness. And there's a metaphor in here called letting go. Here's the purpose. It's to help you to pause and observe. A lot of this stuff can be done in everyday life. Don't think that you've got to do it all in front of the trading screen. Good practice is doing it in everyday life. Like we said, when you're talking to your spouse or somebody, or you're in the shower or you're washing a dish or what have you. Here's another one that can be done in everyday life that's really helpful. So just observe and become aware of a little activity that we call letting go of things. And it's just a simple way to start practicing mindfulness by paying more attention on purpose and non-judgmentally to what's occurring as you interact with the everyday world. So here's a way to go about doing that. You can do this in many different ways, but here's one way to do it. Devote a day next week. Just devote a couple of hours. Devote a morning to this if that's all. But it's fun to do this for a day. And during that day, pay attention, and if you can, write it down. If not, that's okay too. But just pay attention every time your hand lets go of something. Maybe it's a cup of coffee or a glass of water. Maybe it's the pen that you're writing with or the mouse on your computer. Or maybe it's a door handle that you opened, the car door, your house, or somebody else's hand if you shake their hand, or other things that you have. Be mindful of exactly what's going on. Okay? This becomes the object of attention or the focal point of attention. Unlike the breath, now we're focusing on letting go. Notice how you put that glass down. How did you release your fingers? What did it feel like? Was the air cool around your fingers as you let that go? Did you notice a temperature differential if you were, setting a cup of coffee down from warmth or heat to non-warmth, non-heat? Notice the movement of the doorknob when you turned it. And be aware of, part of mindfulness would be being aware of shape and weight and texture and the feel, not feel, but feel of everything you handle and then let go of. And here's something really interesting to do with this. You can play with this in a lot of different ways, but here's one really useful way to play with this. Notice how paying attention versus not paying attention to these things actually influences how you release them. Right? If you're paying attention, you might release them differently than if you weren't paying attention, if you weren't mindful. Okay? Notice that. And this is a good way to practice mindfulness. And you might learn a few things, and it might be worthwhile to jot them down. And it's not a bad idea to do this on a fairly frequent basis. And then think about how being more mindful of letting go could impact your trading. Okay, there's a metaphor here, and there's a purpose. We give this metaphor on purpose because you're letting things go and you're noticing how to let them go. You can let things go when you're trading and other areas of your life too on a day-to-day basis. Begin to start to make connections with other things and your trading. Begin to start to make connections with things that occur with you when you're playing with these mindfulness exercises and other techniques. Make connections to your trading. Make connections to other things in your life. Make connections from other things in your life to trading and vice versa. Because you want to be, we want to be good traders, and you can see lots of stuff in many, many different things. Mindfulness helps you to do that. Todd says something like thinking twice to remember where you put your keys down. I'm not sure that it's going to help you. Well, it certainly is not going to help me do that. But this is a really good mindfulness exercise outside of trading, so it's a useful one to do. And enjoy it. Have fun with it. Now, There are times, and there will be times, when you're going to have strong urges to cut that winner short and flee. That fight or flight syndrome or reflex is going to, pop in really hard, and so there's going to be strong urges. There's no question. It's not easy to do this stuff, and it's certainly not easy to face the discomfort that we have. So it's going to be natural that don't start evaluating yourself next week because you're not able to do this perfectly. Don't fall into that trap, okay? Remember we said part of fear, why it's such a problem, part of it is the E aspect of fear, the evaluation. We tend to evaluate, and then we tend to make a reason that we've got to, cure this before we can do our trading. Don't get into that game. Just be patient and be kind to yourself. It's natural that the urges to cut and run will show up and probably continue to show up for your entire life. Tim Borkin of The Money Show and Traders Expo did a wonderful audio. He talked about this on the internet. He interviewed some 200 successful traders, and he kind of identified all their traits and characteristics and kind of boiled them all down into 20 of them. And so he did a couple of videos, or audios actually, on this. Well, one of the things that he found consistent across all the successful traders that he talked to, and he talked to 200, was that they're all uncomfortable in their trading. They all still get uncomfortable. Even if some of them had 20, 25 years of experience, they will still feel discomfort in their trades. And yet, just like Captain Sullenberger, just like Tiger Woods, they found a way to deal with it, level those wings, check their airspeed, and land that plane. And these folks, men and women who have long experience with trading and who are successful, still do get uncomfortable. So be patient and be kind to yourself. It's really important. And just keep in mind, even if you catch yourself evaluating yourself, notice that for what it is. Thank your mind for doing that, but just notice that it's some words, some thoughts, and we don't have to buy into that. We know that evaluations never add to these kinds of evaluations never add to the experience. So just notice that. So all of the skills that we've been talking about so far help us deal effectively with avoidance because they're going against the old habits. But sometimes, especially in the beginning, we're going to feel overwhelmed. We're going to feel like that, everything is happening at once. So here's a couple of techniques that you can use. One is, and I mentioned I'd say this before, put your thoughts and urges on index cards. You can do this, quietly, or you can do them when they show up, and you can label them and write them down, okay? And always notice that you've got a choice to do what the card says. So if, let's say, you're in a trade, and you can do this after the trade, but if you're in the trade and they say, cut that winner short, get out of that trade. So you write that down, get out of trade, okay? Notice now that you always have a choice to do what that card says, which is going to, engage your emotions in a self-focused way, right, rather than a task-focused way. Or you can move more towards what's important to you and your trade, okay? You can always do that. Just whatever decision you make, and you may make the decision to cut the winner short. Just notice before you do that you've got a choice to do what the card says or not, okay? And to get a sense of the struggle that you've got, and here's kind of a metaphor, but put the cards between your palms and then press really hard. And that's your struggle here, right? And then take that card with that thought and place it on your lap. Now, it sounds silly, but the point here is that the thought's still there. whether you're struggling with it or it's gently sitting on your lap. It's your choice. It's your choice to either struggle with it or to do something different instead of struggling with those thoughts and those feelings. Okay? And also, you might have, I had one trader who had, I think, 100 cards. He finally did. You can have lots of these cards, these index cards. Take them around with you. They're always with you anyway. You might as well carry them around. Okay? And I'm being a little silly here and I'm being a little facetious, but I'm also being serious. Take these things with you because they are always with you. And notice what you're doing. You're doing all kinds of things when you've got these thoughts with you, regardless that you've got them. Okay? All right, so that's one technique you can do. Another one is something that we call surfing our emotions. We've kind of mentioned that the emotions come and go. They're wave-like. They build up, they crest, to a peak, and then they diminish, right, on the ebb side of the wave. So emotions are just like waves. And they come and they go, just like the tide, like the waves in a tide. So you can be like a seagull or a surfer if you like. Maybe a seagull isn't such a great image. Maybe a surfer is a good image. And you can ride those waves. You can float on the waves. You can surf those waves of emotion, okay? And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about in a moment. But you can also rate them. And we call them SUDs, subjective units of distress. Only psychologists could come up with those terms, right? Subjective units of distress. But it's helpful to rate the waves. It's kind of like the old American Bandstand. Well, I give that song a 10, or I give that song a 7. The point being is that if you rate them, you start to rate them, you're going to quickly learn that not all the waves of emotion are 10s. Not all of them are 9s. Okay, they're gonna have various intensities. And here is a scale. Here is the subjective units of distress, or the SUDS rating scale. Okay, it goes from 0 to 10, and you can change this in any way you like. It's okay, but 0 means you feel no distress whatsoever. You're pretty serene. Something like, if you're taking a bath or having a massage or lying on the beach or watching a funny movie, no real stress there, right? No real fear. Somewhere between 1 and 4, you've got a mild level of fear or anxiety or worry, but it's pretty easy to cope with this situation, right? You might feel that you're more alert or just slightly nervous. If you're up around 4, you might start to notice unpleasant thoughts. Sometimes I'll get them before I do a presentation, and I'll rate it as a 4, right? I still have those thoughts, even though I do lots of them. A moderate level, you can rate it as a 5 or a 6. It's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant, and you notice that, and you might become distracted, and you might be thinking, gee, this is getting difficult to cope with, and something really needs to be done with them. But you're still able to focus on what's happening, your trade or whatever. You can do this outside of trading as well. 7 or 8 would be a higher level. Now you got the racing heart, the muscle tension, shallow breathing, all of that stuff. It's now become difficult to concentrate on what's happening. You're feeling like you've got to escape this discomfort. And then 9 or 10, you're way up there. You've lost control. Folks said that earlier. Can't cope, and you're overwhelmed by unbearably bad feelings, and you've got to get out of there. So that's the subjective units of distress scale. It's pretty straightforward here. So now you can use these techniques, and by the way, the SUDS scale is in your workbook, as is this stressful situations form. You can you can, let me just go back. One last thing that I want to say about rating here. Why rate these things? It kind of sounds silly. Why do we rate them? Well, there's two really good reasons for it. One, I think I said this before, you're going to see that not every situation has the same level of fear and distress, but we might act like it does. So now we're starting to get a better handle on this, the overall feeling of fear and stress, okay? And that's useful because we can say, well, gee, this one's a 6. Yesterday I dealt with one that was an 8 and I was able to get through it. Maybe 6 isn't so bad. Maybe I can, you understand what I'm saying? All of a sudden now you're starting to grade these things and you're beginning to calibrate them a little bit. And just by doing that, you begin to have a little more control, not over them, but over your response to them. Because you're saying, well, it's still there, it's a 5 or a 6, but yesterday I had a 7 or an 8, so maybe I can still focus on what I need to do. It's not saying that the 5 or 6 is going away necessarily, but your response to it is going to be a little bit different. So that's one of the reasons why it's useful to rate these things. And as you practice mindfulness, another useful bit to this is that you're going to probably see these things go down over time. What might be all 7s, 8, and a few 9s might start to become 5s and 6s and 7s and a few 4s thrown in there. Okay, and this is not a bad way to measure and to be objective about this a little bit and see if this is really helping you. Okay, so just want to point those two things out. Now, when you get into a situation, it's a really good idea to rate your stress or your fears, identify and jot down your thoughts, feelings, and sensations, observe, separate them out like the observing self, right? And then identify the strategy that you're using to respond to them and what effect this has had. So let's go through a couple of examples. Here, somebody just wrote down the date and time. It's somewhat helpful to do that. And they took a short trade that was consistent with their trading plan, but they got fearful and stressed, and they rated that a 7, pretty high. Person says, I got scared. I got scared when price went higher for a couple of minutes. They were in a short trade. Their thought, I know this market is going to get me. Oh, there's a good one. And their feelings and sensations, they had tension in their back, and they noticed that their mouth was dry. So what did they do? Well, they used the observing self, and they surfed it. That's what they said here, okay? And they labeled this as my thought as a threat. In other words, they said the market's going to get me. It's a threatening thought. We didn't really talk about this, but that's one of the traps that is easy to fall into as a thinking trap. And you can read a little bit more about that in the, as I said, I encourage you to do this as you do the exercises in the workbook. So they labeled this as a threatening thought. And at the end, that was enough to help them say, at the end I said out loud, how crazy I thought that I knew that this market was going to get me. How crazy was that thought? So by doing this, by using these strategies, they were able to distance themselves. And after the trade was over, they were able to say, my, that was silly. That was a crazy thought. So maybe the next time they have that crazy thought, they're going to remember this. And maybe it's not a 7 the next time. Maybe it's only a 6 or a 4 or a 5 because they remember how crazy this was and they were able to get through it anyway. That's the idea here, okay? Let's just go through another example. A short trade as the market breaks support. They rated this as a 5. I felt apprehensive. There's the feeling, right? Not terror or fear, but apprehension, even though the market was going in my direction. Now, that's common with a lot of folks. Even though the market's traveling in the direction of the trade, they still feel, you know, uptight about it, that apprehension. They still have some anxiety or fear. Thought, it will come back and take me out. I should tighten my stop. Notice tension in the back and in the shoulders. So what strategy did they use? They used the observing self, and they labeled the thought. They said, I'm having the thought that it will take me out. I noticed that I had surfed a 7 yesterday, and this one didn't feel as bad. When I stepped back and labeled my thought, I realized it was just a thought, and I was able to hold on to this trade. Okay? That's how you can start to use these techniques that we're talking about here. And I'm going to show you some even more powerful ones than these. But these are pretty good now, okay? Now, as I said, it takes practice, it takes effort, it doesn't come overnight. But if you work with this stuff, you should begin to see that you're bringing mindfulness and other techniques into your trading, and you should begin to see some positive effect. Okay. All right. So those are some techniques. Now, I want to hone in. Any questions on those before we move on here? Let me just pause for a second because I'm talking, because I want to try to get through all of this material. There's an awful lot of material here. Let me just pause and see if there are any questions on any of these techniques or anything that we've talked about so far. And I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to move on in the interest of time. But if you do, go ahead and type it in, and I'll just keep the chat box up here and make sure that I pick it up quickly. Okay? We'll come back to it. But I want to move on now into value choices and high-value trading actions that are going to bring us closer to our trading goals. We've kind of talked around this, saying that, there's a self-focus versus a task focus. When we're self-focused, we're going inside and we're thinking about our thoughts and our feelings and all of that, and that causes us to lose connection with the tasks that we have to do as a trader. Think about it. Let's say you were playing tennis, and the tennis player is out there, and their task is to serve the ball and to hit the ball in such a way as to cause errors in their opponent, right? Well, if they're focused on what the crowd is saying and how they're feeling tense and nervous and all of that, they're not going to be able to strike the ball well. They're not going to be able to hit the ball well. They're going to not be able to focus on their strategy and hit an approach shot or a cross court or whatever is called for. Instead, they're going to be focused on their emotions and on their thoughts, and they're not going to be in the zone. They're going to play poorly. Okay, so this is now beginning to talk about focusing in on those tasks, those high-value actions that are so important to trading. And good research, and just anecdotal evidence, but really good research shows that the performers who focus on values and high-value actions across all fields, whether they're musicians or athletes or traders, they're going to train harder and more consistently. They're going to make better choices, especially in the face of hardships and adversity and negative thoughts and negative feelings. And trading has a lot of adversity to it, right? We're taking losses. That's adverse. That's not, that doesn't feel good. And so when we can focus instead of on our emotion, instead of making emotion-driven choices, we're making values-driven choices. Choices related to what matters most to us in our trading, rather than trying to repair our emotion and fix our emotion, then we're going to be able to deal with that adversity better. And we're going to be able to persevere in the everyday activities that, ultimately lead to goal achievement. And that's pretty straightforward. It makes sense to us, okay? But let me go on a little bit deeper with this and talk about something that all top performers have. They have this thing called mental toughness. And I want to talk about how we define mental toughness and what it is. And that is, it's an ability to act purposefully and consistently in the pursuit of what's most important to you and to your trade. even and especially, and I put those in I italicize those because it's so important, even when we're faced with strong emotions that we as humans naturally want to control or eliminate. This is mental toughness. Okay? This is mental toughness. Get out of your head the idea that people don't deal with adversity every single day. I'm talking about top performers now, top traders, top athletes, top musicians, top everybody, anybody who's a performer, who's out there, lawyers, surgeons, they're all faced with strong emotions and strong adversity. And yet, just like Tiger Woods and just like Captain Sullenberger, they do what they have to do despite all of that. Okay? When we are making choices and trying what I call emotion-driven choices, when we're trying to repair what's happening, let's just go through this. And I call this the vicious cycle of ineffective trading. The trade sets up and is observed and hopefully executed. We get that emotional response, that fear sets in because maybe the price is moving against us a little bit or whatever. Attention shifts from trade management to our internal state. Remember, our internal state are our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations, the images that we're having, all of those things that are inside of us, not out on the computer screen. Our attention shifts to those, right? Remember the mindfulness exercise. It shifts off of the focus of the breath and onto the thoughts that we have, the stories that our mind is telling us and trying to get us to ride off somewhere, okay? When we focus on our internal state, especially when we're under this response here, this fight or flight response, we're going to be struggling, and the outcome is we're going to want to escape. And that leads to reliable relief. We get rid of this fear, right, and this internal state. We eliminate that. But we don't do anything for our trading, and that then becomes a vicious cycle, and it's ineffective when we're when we're making our choices out of our emotions. When we can focus on high-value actions, and we'll talk exactly about what those are, we're going to see that trade set up, we're going to execute it, we're going to still have the emotional response, there's no question, it doesn't go away. But attention is maintained on what's most important, not internal, but on the tasks relevant to the trade. We're then going to be in a position where we can manage that trade. And win, lose, or draw, whether it's a winning trade, a losing trade, or we break even on it because we brought our stop up. We were able to manage that trade, and we were able to focus on high-value actions, not our internal state. That's going to do one thing and one thing only as long as we're serious about this, and that is it's going to build us sound trading skills so that the next time we see a trade set up and we execute it, we're a little bit better than we were on the last one. And this begins to build a synergistic cycle of effectiveness. And that's really what we're looking for. And it all relates to this. Okay? Mindfulness is helpful. Some of the techniques that we've talked about is helpful. But let's start talking now a little bit more about this idea of focusing in on mental. I got the slides out of whack. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this. But let's talk about what this really means in terms of mental toughness. What we're talking about here is we're putting full attention onto the moment. We're using mindfulness to develop that self-awareness and that decentering or defusing from what our mind is telling us. We're cultivating that mental space where we can make choices about what we're going to do. That's the idea here. Are we going to focus on our breath, or are we going to go ride some thought into the sunset? Are we going to focus on the trade, or are we going to ride the fearful, scary, commanding thoughts that are telling us to get out of this trade? Okay? That's part of mental toughness. The other part of mental toughness is what we call poise. It's having real clarity on what high-value actions are in our trading so we know what we're going to focus on. Okay? It's understanding that we can't control our feelings and our mind's fear-based thoughts and images. We've talked a lot about that tonight. And it's accepting these temporary thoughts and emotions at the same time it's acting and making choices on the high-value activities that are so important to our trading, not on the temporary thoughts and emotions that we're having while we're trying to do this. We're just accepting them as they are, as thoughts and emotions. And again, I'm saying it's not easy to do, but I'm giving you some techniques so that you can begin to get a handle on this stuff. It does take a lot of work, but you start to accept these, and you commit to, almost come hell or high water, so to speak, doing the things that are most important to you in your trade. Okay? All right, so let's get into here and talk about what high-value trading actions are. They're actions that are under your control. Okay? We've already said that we really can't control our thoughts and our emotions, can we? Because they come and they go all the time. And we said that we've never met anybody who can consistently do that. I was in a seminar in Denver, and one of the things I said, somebody looked at me as if to say, well, that's not really true. We can control our emotions. So I said, okay, if you can control your emotions, then, and you can try to do this now, or imagine what it would be like. Put yourself into a rage right now. Just put yourself into real anger, ripping, vicious rage. And I waited, and no one could do it. I said, okay, you can't do that? Then turn to the person to your right and fall in love. And they all laughed, right? They all laughed because they recognized how ridiculous that was. You can't put yourself into a rage. You can't make yourself fall in love with the person next to you. You don't have control over those emotions, at least on a consistent and long-term basis. Okay, they come and they go. So high-value trading actions, however, are under your control. You can control those. They all relate to the process of trading. They're all elements that go into trading. We'll talk a little bit about process too tonight. With practice, they're going to expand your repertoire of effective interaction. Okay? They're all about things like trade management and setting stops and what have you. And they're going to increase the likelihood of better and more consistent trading results. And indirectly, they're going to build confidence and self-esteem. Okay? Because the better you get at those, the better you get at doing them, the more confidence and self-esteem you're going to have. So where are high-value actions found? Well, they're found in three places in trading. They're found in what you do for preparation, or what you do before trading, whether it's the night before or the weekend before the week that you're going to trade or what have you, right? We'll talk a little bit about them. It might be things like, where is support and resistance? What, if you're following moving averages, what's the moving average or the indicators? What are they saying to you? It's preparing. Confidence comes from being well prepared. That's a key part of developing confidence. And there are high-value actions that you can undertake in your preparation. Study, as I say, kind of noting where support and resistance are and things like that. Effective execution. Well, this occurs during trading. I'll go through execution with you in detail. We'll go through some details on that. And then there's also after the trading is over. Few traders do this, but doing what I call accurate self-assessment. So before, during, and after, really the only three things you can do, and the only three things I can help you do is improve your quality preparation, get better at your execution, and help you deal with results through self-assessment. after your trading is over. And there are certain things you can do for each one of those that can help you. All right, let's just take a look at effective execution, high-value actions related to the during phase of trading or execution. And again, they all are under your control, and they all relate to the actual process of trading. And they're going to be the mechanics, the specific mechanics. Identifying the trade setup, making sure that it meets your trading plan and the criteria in the trading plan, and being clear about it, knowing crystal clear, does this meet it or not, and being able to do that. Seeing where the stop should be located. Is there a space, is there a spot, let's say we're taking a long trade to keep things simple. Is there some support underneath your entry where you can see a stop that's reasonable? Or is the stop too far away? Or is there no place to put a stop? Is it too tight? But being able to see that and being able to recognize that. Seeing the exit, where are you going to get out of this trade? Maybe there's all different ways to exit a trade. An indicator value, a higher level of resistance, or even just a price point. 3 points in the S&Ps is my exit. Can you see this trade develop into that? And then from the exit and the stop, can you assess risk reward? That's another high value action that you can take. Okay, notice all of this stuff is focusing on the trading tasks, the actual mechanics, the process of trading, not on your emotions, not on your thoughts. You can have negative thoughts, you can have negative emotions, but you're going to focus on making the entry, looking for, maybe you're looking for a key reversal bar to, a bar that dips down and closes on its high. Maybe you're going to be looking for that. Or maybe it's prices coming down to a moving average. And when it hits that, when it closes at that moving average, that's your entry. Whatever your entry is, however you define it, maybe it's putting a stop above a bar as it's coming down. Maybe you're putting a stop under each high. And that's your high value action, okay, for making that entry. Placing the stop underneath support. Managing the trade, watching this trade. This is the hardest part right here, is managing the trade for most people. The entry can be hard for others, but managing the trade. Seeing the trade and knowing that it's moving in your direction and not all of a sudden coming, changing direction on you, and then making that exit. Those are the high value execution tasks and mechanics of trading. Those are the things that we want to be focused on. Now, everybody's going to be a little bit different. Excuse me, everybody's going to be a little bit different depending on their experiences, depending on their, I don't know, I wouldn't say issues, but the things that they want to get better on. And I'll talk about this in a second. But in your workbook is a form here where you can list out your own personal list of high-value trading actions that will lead to solid trading and confidence in your trading, eventually confidence. And I say everybody's going to be a little bit different. Let's say, you can have high-value actions for very specific things. Let's say, for example, you notice a pattern in your trading. You're counter-trend trading trends, okay? And you're saying to yourself, I got to stop this. This is not productive for me. This is not constructive. Every time I get an uptrend, I'm shorting. Every time I get a downtrend, I'm going long. And I'm trying to pick these spots, and it's not a good thing. So one of your high-value actions might be identifying whether the market is trending or not. Okay, you might be, one of your high-value actions is to go in and say, is the market trending? And to be able to identify, is it making higher highs, higher lows, or lower highs and lower lows? Okay, so different folks are going to have different high-value actions. Now, here's a way to some tips on doing this. Sit down quietly and just, what would it look like if you were trading confidently day after day? What specific skills and abilities would you be able to observe? And knowledge too. Maybe there's certain knowledge that you don't have that you feel like you need to have. And maybe a high value action, a preparation action, right? Because we're going to do this not while we're in the middle of trading, but before we're trading, is to develop better knowledge. Maybe you don't know exactly what a good trending system is if you're that counter trend trader. So maybe you want to do some research on looking at how we know we're in a good trend. Okay, maybe you want to consult Wyckoff, or you want to consult Keltner and his method, or somebody who uses a moving average system. You might want to consult their books or something and pick one. So maybe that's a preparation high value action. Okay. You want to avoid things like, well, I'd be calm, or I wouldn't be fearful, or I'd be trading well. Those are too general, and they're not very useful. I don't know what it means to be calm. Okay. I do know what it means to be focused on making an entry, however, and that's a high value action. Okay, here's another way to do it, is visualize how an expert trader would act. If you were able to sit there and see an expert trader trade, and they were able to, and they were really good at telling you what they were doing, then you get a good, clear idea on what high value actions would be. The basic idea here is just to be thoughtful about what actions and what behavior is valuable in your trading. Okay, we've all had the tendency to focus in on our emotions and our thoughts. I want to get you off of that dime and start focusing in on the things that are going to produce good trading results for you, that are going to produce confidence indirectly, and that are going to make you a better trader. It's the same thing with a tennis player, or let's take a batter, because some people aren't familiar with trading. But let's take a batter. It's the ability to see that ball coming in and to know that it's coming in and to be able to decide and to make that swing. And maybe the high value actions in that baseball player is to adjust his swing a little bit. Maybe it's holding the bat up higher. Maybe it's stepping into the plate properly. Whatever those actions are that he needs to do to get himself prepared before he hits, to actually hit, and then to run to the base and be as quick as he can after the hit. You know, there again, before, during, and after. Those are where he wants to focus his high value actions on. That's where he wants to know, that's where he wants to get clear on what it is that he's got to do to be able to hit well and to play well. And it's the same thing in trading. It's knowledge, it's skills, and abilities that you are going to acquire. Okay? Okay. So why do HVAs? Well, just in general, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward, but just in summary, we're going to, it's expanding your ability to interact with the market. Remember, we talked about when we're focused on our emotions and trying to escape our thoughts and our negative feelings, our fearful feelings, that avoidance response that we get into when we're in fear. This is the exact opposite, because when we're only focused on getting rid of fear and only focused on our feelings and thoughts, our ability to interact with the market is negligible. We're very limited. Remember, we said it's kind of rigid. We're only focused on one thing and one thing only. Here we're talking about expanding our ability to interact with the market by focusing in on things that are important to us in our trading. Okay? We're certainly less likely to lose focus or make unforced errors when we're focused on high-value actions. And we're certainly less likely to focus in on our internal state where trade navigation gets lost and the likelihood of poor trade results increases. And it also reduces that cognitive activity. Because we have a focal point, it's like the breath. The more we can focus on the breath, the less likely we are to wander off. We will still do that. We'll still have thoughts. We'll still have cognitive activity. But then we refocus back in on the high-value actions. Okay? And again, it takes commitment and a certain level of practice. And again, you want to clarify your personal high-value actions in terms of how you're preparing to trade, how you're executing the trades, and how you're evaluating the trades. And I have an article, and I think it's available on the website. If not, you can send me an email and I'll send it to you. I published an article in SFO magazine. I published two articles. One on is definitely on the website, and if not, we'll put this up on the website if it's not. But one, or you know what we can do? I'll just send it to you. I shouldn't do this because SFO, well, I shouldn't even say this. I'll just send it to you. I'll send you these two tomorrow, okay? I wrote two articles, one on mindfulness, the other one on high-value actions. So that will also help you, I think, in clarifying all of this. All right, let's talk a little bit about putting high-value actions into action. But how to put them into your trading. All right, first and foremost, you need to clarify exactly how you're going to begin to focus on the process of trading. What specific trading relevant tasks are important to you? And use the form that we just went through. Here's another way you can do it. Ask yourself, what high-value actions can I identify that if I put them into practice would have a positive impact on my trading? What HVAs can I identify that if I put them into practice would have a positive impact on my trading? Pick things that are going to be useful for you, okay? And pick one or two HVAs in each area, in preparation, in execution, and evaluation, and work on those, okay? Get good at those. So let's take a look at how you can do this. And this is pretty strong stuff. This is potent stuff now that I'm giving you, okay? You want to put high-value actions into action. Go in small steps. You don't have to do everything all at once, okay? Go slow. Gains are made by small incremental steps, not by large leaps. Large leaps are usually never strong gains, but going incrementally, bit by bit, that's where you build strong gains. So you want to go small. And I'm going to go through an example for you, and you'll see that. So the process is this. Identify the HVA that you want to put in place. Break it down into manageable, specific parts. Make a plan, and I'm giving you a form here to do that. And then do it mindfully and record the results, okay? It's pretty straightforward. Let's just do an example. And I have in your workbook is this form, a blank form for you. And here's an example. So high-value trading behavior or high-value trading action. This person said, I want to hold an open trade to the profit objective, okay? That's my overall goal. Okay, let's break that down and let's make it doable. Let's make it incremental and do it in small steps, not try to do it all at once, okay? So what would be a short-term goal that's associated with the high-value trading action? Here, this trader said, I'm going to extend my average profit by 1 point. This trader kept good statistics on their trades, and they had a profit. You know, they had several different trades. This is an actual example, by the way, of a trader I worked with. So they had several different trades in their trading plan, both to the long side and the short side, and they kept stats on themselves, and they knew that you know, their long trade here, long trade number one, whatever it was, a reaction in a trending market, their average trade was 2 points or 2.5 points. They knew that by the stats that they kept. So they're saying, I want to keep that average trade to 3.5 points, x plus 1. Okay? It's a small, incremental, doable step. Okay? Their long-term goal associated with holding an open trade to a profit objective is to hold their position until they get a clear signal that the swing or the trend is over. Okay? That's a nice long-term goal. They want to hold this to the maximum profit that they can get out of it, and that's a good goal. But that's too much to be working on if they're cutting their winners short, which is what this is all about here. Okay, they're trying to extend their holding by a point, by a simple point. You can do it as a half a point is okay, doing it small. So what's the specific behavior that you're going to change or you're going to add to get to this goal? All right. So this person said, after I enter the trade and after I set my stop, I'm going to immediately set a limit order to exit 1 point more than my average profit for the trade. Okay, so that's pretty good. This is a high value action in and of itself, setting their exit point through a limit order. Okay, so in other words, if they got into a trade at say 10 and their average was 2 points, then they're going to set a limit for 13. Okay, to try to get 3 points out of this trade. What are they going to do to support this new behavior? Okay, this person says, look, I know it's going to be difficult. And it was for them. Once the trade has reached an average profit, I'm going to try to make it easier on myself, and I'm going to move my stop to break even. So once they have 2 points in the trade, in this example, they're going to bring their stop up to break even. That's not a bad psychological move because it's going to be helpful to them in handling some of the, in some of the aspects of taking a loss. Now at least they've got a trade on that's not going to cost them any money. But they're also going to be, they're going to strive to be mindful and employ their observing self. I'm going to rate how well I do this. There's a good idea. Don't just rate the stress. Now rate how well you are, how good you're doing with mindfulness, and how well you're doing with being observing of all of this stuff. Okay? That puts a different color to it, right? That's a horse of a different color, as we might say. It's not just rating the negative, but now it's forcing you to pay attention to the positive side of this, focusing in on the high value actions and being mindful about it by engaging your observing self, by using some of the techniques that I'm talking about. Okay? Okay, so that's their plan. This is their plan to do this. Now, times come up, situations come up, and here we have one that occurred. They had a long trade that had a potential for several points. And so they recorded this at the end of the trade. They rated their stress level with that SUD, that subjective unit of distress. And they rated this as an 8. Okay? And here's some of the notes that they did. And this is maybe a little bit more than you need to do, but it's helpful to do this. But this is the way you need to think about this stuff. Hey, it wasn't easy at first. And we're not saying that it is going to be easy, okay? But it's not impossible either. That's the thing you got to keep in mind. It may not be easy, but it certainly isn't impossible, and you have to believe that. I immediately started to observe thoughts and feelings. I noticed muscle tension the most, and also my hands trembled. That's good. I had the thought, I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose. It was nonstop. So notice now, they're separating out some of the signs and symptoms that we talked about earlier, the physical sensations, the thoughts that they're having, okay? When I got to my normal profit level, my mind says, just take the normal profit and be happy. That's going to be best, right? And then as profit stalled a bit, my mind says, don't be an idiot. Just take your profit. And I remember this person, their mind wasn't just saying that to them. It was screaming it to them on this particular trade example, this particular situation. They felt fearful and very nervous. Remember, they rated this as an 8. That's pretty strong, right? But they were trying their darndest to be mindful, and they also were able to notice that every bar on the chart was closing up. I also noticed they said when they were more fearful when price came back a good bit. Good observation. All right, let me erase this so I'm kind of doing this. You probably can't read it as I'm going along. That's not helpful, is it? Setting the stop to break even was helpful. I rate my self-observation and mindfulness as a 6. I actually argued with this person and said it was probably higher than that, but this is what they rated themselves. I was surprised to actually get the extra point, and I felt pretty good about that. Okay. Now, they could have also done a few other things. They could have, at the end, they could have said, gee, you know, I really can label my thoughts as the trap here of, you know, believing it to be true when it wasn't true. I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose, and maybe scary at the same time, right? They could have said that, you know, that as well, or they could have surfed a little bit, or they could have done other things. But this is how you start taking these things and start working with them in a serious way. It's not about, you know, this is real performance psychology. This is not about lying on a couch and talking about your childhood fantasies and, you know, that kind of stuff. That's, you know, maybe in some instances it's helpful, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about practical, specific things that you can do, because this is common for everybody, and not everybody's had and a lot of good traders have had problematic childhoods and difficult families and stuff. And, you know, it's not about that stuff. It's not about self-sabotage. I'm sure some people do self-sabotage from time to time, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're trying to talk about some practical things that you can do. And okay, so that should be pretty straightforward there. Yeah, you can adjust your mic says you can adjust stops as you and do more than that. Certainly you can. That's true. This is an example, Mike, and you've got to make it personal. You're an individual like everybody else is, and what's good for this trader that we looked at may be different than what is useful and important to you. Okay. Now, I want to say something about these HVAs and about value-driven choices. There's always discomfort there, okay? Remember we talked about Tim Borkin's observation with 200 successful traders. There is always discomfort. But emotions are not the enemy. The key is noting them, noticing those emotions, and letting them go as best you can, and staying focused on what matters in the long run. And that's going to be your high-value trading actions, rather than choosing to eliminate or avoid or escape or reduce a temporary feeling. Okay? You're going to have some discomfort there. If you didn't, you wouldn't be human. But it's okay to have that discomfort. You want to do what matters to you, the high-value actions, even if sometimes it doesn't feel good. And you're doing it in the service of what's meaningful to you. And I'm going to give you a little way to think about that in a moment. But, you know, acceptance of that discomfort is an important part of this. And we're not really spending a lot of time on it, but just being willing to experience this discomfort because you're doing something that's more important. You're doing something that really matters. I'm willing to accept the fear. I'm willing to accept a 7 on the SUD scale because I want to manage this trade, and by gosh, I want to be a good trader. That's kind of the mindset you need here, okay? And, you know, you can even think about it in terms of anything, you know the story, anything good takes effort, right? Well, I would say anything good takes some distress and discomfort too. Let's say you want to become physically fit, right? Well, there's some discomfort to this. You've got to decide that fitness is important to you. There's a process that you go through with that. You've got to decide to follow and develop a specific plan, and then you got to decide to follow it. You got to make daily choices about that. You know, sometimes there's gonna be somebody who says, hey, let's go out and go to dinner, or let's go have a beer, and you've got to make the decision, which is more important to me? Is it being fit, or is it going out for the umpteenth time and having that beer or eating poorly? You got to make the decision. Is focusing on the high-valued action more important to me, or am I going to, once for the umpteenth time, give in to these emotions, be mindless about them, and be back at, at the starting line again? So you got to be willing to experience the discomfort, whether you're trading or whether you're making choices to lose weight, get fit, whatever you're going to do. Okay? And you've got to accept the fact that you're going to be doing this across many days, across many weeks, and many months, because it doesn't happen overnight. If you want the benefits to be realized, it takes time to do that. All right. This is a chart that I think many traders find this that I work with very useful. And it's all about mental toughness, and it's all about taking control of the mental side of trading, and it's all about developing some flexibility in your trading psychology, giving you what I consider to be a psychological edge, right? Rather than reacting to what's going on inside you, developing this edge. Now, here's how it works. And it's going, the numbers here go 1, 2, and 3, you can see, and then 4 and 5 and 6. They're it's sort of a cockamamie numbering system. I didn't create that. Somebody else did, but you can see. So, number 1, it's a kind of a question that you ask yourself. Being self-aware and knowing that there's a difference between you and your struggles. You can set yourself apart from the struggle with your emotions and with your mind, and engage that observing self that we've talked so much about tonight. Being self-aware, engaging that observing self, can you ask yourself this question? Am I willing to be open to all of my thoughts and all of my feelings and all of my sensations? Not try to control them, just be open to them, to have them as they occur. And can I notice what my mind is telling me for what it is, not what it says it is? Right? So am I willing to be open to these things and not try to struggle with them? And most importantly, can I notice what my mind is telling me for what it is? Can I decenter from my mind a little bit? And can I take then action in the direction of what matters to me, both as a trader and for this trade? HVAs. Can I take action on those? Because those are what matter, not my thoughts and feelings and sensations. And can I do it right now in this present moment? Not tomorrow, not the next day, not on the next trade, but right now. This is the question that you can ask yourself. And if you can do this, you got a psychological edge. You got a trading psychology edge, and you got mental toughness. And that's what we're talking about here, developing this. This and nothing more and nothing else is going to bring you confidence. And down below here, I also have this little kind of graphic here. You've always got a choice. You either can choose to struggle with your emotions, not be open to them, but struggle with them. Not notice that your mind is telling you stuff that may or may not be true. It doesn't really matter what your mind is telling you. It's not helping you in your trading. You can struggle with that, and that's going to lead to one place and one place only: inconsistent trading and suffering. You're going to suffer because it's not pleasant to continue to do this and to continue to be fearful. I know from personal experience, from years of personal experience and personal suffering, and not just the monetary loss, but the personal, the self-esteem and all of that stuff. I mean, there have been times when I've cried myself to sleep. I'm not kidding you. I'm serious about that. I was so distraught over this stuff. So you can choose that, and that is real suffering. And I'm sure many of you in this room, in this virtual room, know this. You always have a choice to choose to struggle or to choose to focus in on high-value actions. Take valued action in your trading, and that's going to lead to consistent trading and not suffering, but vitality. And that's really important. That's really, really important. So that's something that people will print out and keep on their trading desk and use this. And people have reported to me that this has been very helpful to them. And remember, we're talking about mental toughness, and it's the two things that are reflected in this chart. It's being mindful. Here is mindfulness. All of this is mindfulness here, right? Let me erase what's on here so you're clear about this. All of these are mindfulness, and it's having poise, taking action despite how we feel in the right direction according to what matters to us as traders overall and for the given trade, right? And doing it mindfully, doing it in the present moment. That's poise. That's mental toughness. And that's what we're talking about. All right. I want to wrap up, but before we do, I want to unwind a little bit more this shift from a self-focus to task focus. And I want to talk a little bit about process versus results. This is also important, and it's kind of an attitude and a mindset that's useful to have. This in and of itself is a high-value action, being able to think in terms of process, not outcomes or not results. So it's all about, what do we mean by, I'm talking about it. When we talk about process, I'm talking about a task focus. When we talk about results, I'm talking about an outcome focus. Is the trade a winner or a loser, right? When I'm talking about process, I'm talking about high-value trading actions, okay? That's what we mean by process thinking. So it requires a shift in thinking, doesn't it? It's away from outcomes and towards process, and this is going to be helped by mindfulness and the focus on high-value actions. But trading, it's not that results don't matter. Certainly they do. We're in this to get profits, right? We're not in this because those things don't matter. Of course they do. We have to make money. But what I'm saying is that judging only on results, only on the outcomes of your trade, traps you. It catches you on the wrong side of the probability paradox that trading is all about. And that paradox is that on a trade-by-trade basis, the market is unpredictable. We never know whether a trade is going to work out or not. If we have a 70-30 edge on a trade, if the trade works out 70% of the time, well, there's still 30% of the time when it doesn't work out. And we never really know whether it's going to be fitting in one of the 70% column or if it's going to be, recorded in the 30% column. But over many trades, if we take hundreds of trades and it's got 70-30, then 70% of those trades should come out to be profitable. So that's the paradox here. On a trade-by-trade basis, the market's relatively uncertain and unpredictable. But if we're looking at results, we're focused on that trade-by-trade basis. And this is the scary side of the paradox. We really don't want to be on this side of the paradox. Where we want to be is judging how we make decisions and how well we made those decisions, how well we followed our high-value trading actions. That's the process of trading. And how well we did that gives us what I call a higher level of truth, because over many trades, if we're following our high value actions on good solid trade setups that have, that have an edge, then we're going to be profitable. It assumes that we have a trade plan that has an edge. But, all of this stuff that we're talking about, believe me, if we don't have an edge, all of this stuff is not going to be very helpful. That's first and foremost. You really do have to have a good trading edge and a good trading plan. All right. If you're looking at how you're making the decisions, how you're making trading decisions, how you're focused in on the high value actions, it also gives you some psychological cover, because some of the trades are going to be profitable and some are going to lose money. If we have that 70-30 ratio, win-loss ratio, a lot of trades are going to be in that 70%, but every so often we're going to get, every 3 trades out of 10, we're going to get losses. So they get chalked up to that column. But that's okay, because we're looking at this over many trades. We're not focused in on a trade-by-trade basis looking at results. We're looking at our process, and our process requires that we look at trading over a number of trades, okay? Otherwise, you're going to be more subject to fear and anxiety and all the things that we've talked about, okay? And that, when we're focusing on the process of trading, it's going to help us develop that internally based confidence. I talk about this a lot of times, internal versus external confidence. External confidence depends on the market, whether the trade was a winner or a loser. Well, some days are really flat, like we had a couple of days ago. We had a narrow range day. You couldn't make money. Somebody used to say liars couldn't even make money on days like that. If the liars can't do it, I can't do it either. But if we're looking at every single trade and we're looking at our outcomes on those trades, or if we're looking at so many points a week, I'm not saying it's a bad idea to have, a certain number of points that we're striving for each week. That's okay, but to be exclusively focused on them is not a good idea, because, there might be days where we do have narrow ranges, or a week where we have narrow ranges. I remember sitting through 3 months in 2001 where the liars were having a difficult time, and so was I, in making money, because the ranges were so narrow in the S&Ps. Internally based confidence is knowing that you traded well according to your plan, that you focused in on your HVAs, any of the other stuff, the internal things of the thoughts and the feelings you did mindfully. That's knowing you traded well. It's not did I make or lose money, or about how the market rewards you on your trades. You're on a roller coaster of emotions then. But it's knowing that you can focus in on the things that are most important to you, and you can control your losses, and that if you need to, and that the odds are on your side when you follow that process, okay? You can manage the risk. We focus in on a single trade as if it is a life or death situation. Geez, think in large samples. Think in terms of how many trades you're making in a week, or in a month, or in a quarter, or in a year, or in 10 years. That's where we want to be as traders, large sample sizes, not putting all of our, emotions and all of everything that we've got into one single trade, right? And so when you follow this process, you can enter into any trade and take a loss and do damage control if it's needed. This is part of the real edge, right? The struggle with fear and anxiety starts to drop down. Confidence starts to rise. And the paradox comes in here. You get more willing to take the risk, right? And the profitability you should see that increase. So, process versus outcome. It's really fundamental. Here's an interesting thing from Michael Lewis in Moneyball. If you've never read it, it's a good book. I won't tell you about the book because we're running out of time, but he talks about a scenario where they're sitting in Las Vegas at a blackjack table, and somebody has a 17. They've got a 10 and a 7. And the guy says, I'll take a hit. And what does he get? he gets a 4, and everybody on the table pats him on the back and says, nice hit because you made 21 playing blackjack. That's wrong. That's not right. That's a focus on the outcome. It's not a focus on the process. If you're sitting there with 17, you know the thing to do is to stand pat. But everybody looks at the outcome. Everybody's focused on the outcome, and they're going to pat you on the back. You've got to have a different thought. And again, I'm not saying that we should be ignoring our results. We can't do that. That's, that's pie in the sky thinking. The point, though, being is that over the long term, process is always going to dominate outcomes in any field that has a probabilistic nature to it. And trading is all about probabilities. And, there are times when you're going to make a good decision that's going to lead to a negative outcome. And sometimes bad decisions are going to lead to good outcomes. But you can't be thinking about that. Here's a really useful way to think about process versus outcome. On one side, you're going to make the process you're going to look at the process that you're using to make the decision. Is it a good process? Are you focusing on high value actions? Are you trading according to your plan? Are you managing your trade properly? Okay, all of that's good. If you get a good result, then you deserve success. If you get a bad result, if the trade goes against you, well, that's one of those 30%. That goes into the 30% column. It's just a bad break. It's bad luck. It just, the trade normally works, but every so often it doesn't, okay? If you're using a poor decision, if you're jumping out of a trade because you're afraid and you get that bad result, the trade goes on, well, that's kind of poetic justice, isn't it? If you make poor decisions and you jump into a trade that, doesn't meet your plan, but you feel that urge and you get a good result, that's really just dumb luck. It's not repeatable. So having this little idea here in your head about process versus outcome, about following high value actions, being mindful, all of those things that we've talked about versus trade results, I think will help you a little bit. Start to adapt or adopt this attitude as an attitude, or this idea as an attitude. It's a little different than what we've talked about before, but it does relate. Okay. All right. We've talked an awful lot of stuff today. We talked about the 4 primary trading fears that Douglas first came up with, and I think are really good. We talked about that vicious cycle of fear and stress and how that traps us into an ineffective trading process. We've talked about what makes fear and anxiety so problematic. We talked about being fused in with our thoughts, believing them as if they are the truth. We've talked about evaluating, particularly ourselves, in a negative way and how it never, ever helps in dealing with fear. We've talked about how fear causes us to want to cut and run and avoid holding on to a trade, or avoid taking a trade, or avoid focusing in on the high value actions. We're locked into our fear and our anxiety. And reason giving, where we say to ourselves, I've got to get rid of the fear before I can trade well. I can't hold on to this trade because I can't stand the fear. Well, again, that's just another thing that the mind is doing. We've talked about how traders have tried coping with this, how we all have tried coping with this, and how lacking in effectiveness, and not only lacking in effectiveness, but how problematic the costs are in terms of our own psyches and our own thoughts about ourselves and how we perceive ourselves, let alone the money, either lost or given up to fear. We've talked about diffusion and how to go about doing that, labeling thoughts, looking at traps, using mindfulness as a way to separate ourselves from our thoughts. We did some mindfulness tonight. We talked about in lots of different ways how useful mindfulness is and what it does for us. We talked about, in fact, how it is the stepping stone to being in the zone. And we talked a little bit about what being in the zone is and how, first and foremost, it is focusing on tasks, not on emotions, and being mentally tough, being able to be mindful and to be poised. Poised meaning that we can focus in and take those high-value actions despite the adversity we're feeling in the negative thoughts and feelings. That's mental toughness. That's being in the zone. We spent some time talking about high-value trading actions, and we've also talked a lot about how we need to shift away from the self, and in the very end there we talked also about how to shift away from outcomes and begin to focus, I repeated focus, focus to focus, to begin to focus on the process of trading and being mindful and looking at high-value actions and being willing to do that. I gave you that 6-step method of being self-aware, being open to your thoughts and your feelings, noticing what your mind is saying for exactly what it is, just thoughts and words and feelings, not for what it says it is, not that it's reality or that you have to act on it. And then taking action in the direction of the high-value actions that matter most to you, not just for your trade, but also for you as a trader, to grow as a trader. And being able to do it now, at this time, not later, not next week, but right now. Don't avoid, do it, so to speak. And then we went through a series of techniques to use. So, look, you all have now, you have all the tools and knowledge, really, to do this. Now it takes the effort on your part. And again, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's also not impossible either. So before we end, let me just ask if there are any questions, and I'll be happy to spend as long as necessary to go through the questions that you might have, because I want to make sure that every question is answered. And I'll hang on here a bit. So if you asked a question before and it didn't get answered, ask it again, because I think I covered most of, I'm looking at some of the questions that came up, so I think I covered most of that. But in case I didn't, please do ask, and don't hesitate to ask. How do you not have an opinion? That's a good question. You can't not have an opinion, but you can notice that you're having an opinion and just notice it as an opinion, and then do what's important to you anyway. Okay? It's not saying not to have opinions. It's not saying not to have fearful thoughts. It's not saying not to have fear, but to be noticing it. I'm not very clear about the observation of self techniques. Okay, Sandra. A good way to observe is to start with, you can start with things around you. Let's see, how can I do this so that maybe it can be clear to everybody? If you have a pen or a pencil in front of you, just pick it up and notice the color of that pen. Notice, become aware of the light bouncing off and reflecting off of that pen. Notice the weight of that pen. Notice what it feels like to hold that pen in your hands. Turn it over and notice how the colors of the pen or the light of the pen start to change. Okay? That's observation of an object, of a direct object, okay? And it's getting to the details, going right down to the details. Now, observing the self is observing the things that your mind is telling you, your self-talk. As I'm talking here, I might have noticed that you know, I'll just make something up. I notice also that My throat is a little sore from talking, and I'm getting a little tired, and it's, I'm thinking about grabbing a glass of water at the end of this. Okay, but I'm still talking at the same time and still trying to communicate. But I'm able to notice those thoughts that I'm having, right, as I'm doing something else. I'm also able to notice my feelings, my sensations. I'm noticing, for example, where the soles of my feet touch the floor. I happen to have my hand, my chin resting in my hand. I can notice the warmth of the contact points. That's all self-observation. And I can notice the feelings that I'm having inside, not just sensations, not just the physiological sensations, but also the emotional feelings that I have at the moment. That's what self-observation is about, okay? And it's just nothing more, Sandra, than tuning into what's going on in your mind, what your mind is telling you, okay? And a good way to do it, should I attend to those thoughts or ignore it? Neither one necessarily. Just notice them. Just notice that you're having the thoughts, especially if they're fearful ones. Okay, notice that you're having those thoughts. Rama says he'll send my questions by email. That's great. And anybody else who wants to do that, that's great too. Okay, good, Sandra. I'm glad you've got that. If not, or if some questions come up, feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to respond. Sometimes I get lots of them during the day, so sometimes it takes me a couple of days to get back to you, but I will. After a sequence of failed trades, I feel I'm getting negatively conditioned by the market. How do I deal with it? Yeah, of course. That's natural, and that's first and foremost to acknowledge that it's natural to feel like it's difficult to deal with this, and it feels negative. This is the adversity that we have. You want to trade small, really small. If you're trading, do this with traders a lot. If you're trading the S&P E-minis, which a lot of traders that I work with do trade because that's what I trade, shift over to the SPY and trade that. And the SPY is equal, 500 shares of, this is the ETF in the SPY. The 500 shares is equal to one S&P contract. So just trade 100 shares or even trade 50 shares. And make sure you got a broker that's not going to charge you an arm and a leg for it. You should be, with a discount broker where it only costs you a couple of bucks to do that. So reduce the risk is number one, and then start applying these techniques and do it bit by bit, and start building some positive response back and to overcome that negative conditioning, because it's not easy to do. It's very interesting to feel the fear and know it's a feeling and still have a clear mind. It's hard to believe. Yeah, I know it is. It's really hard to believe. We're so conditioned. I said this earlier in Western society, and I don't just mean the U.S. I'm talking about Europe and even in I think it's probably less true in Asia, but true there too. We are conditioned not to be able, to run away from fear and to get rid of it. Anxiety is, the technical term for being fearful. That's the psychiatric or psychological term for it, to worry and to fear. And, anxiety is a bad thing. We try to medicate it, but, it's natural. I don't know anybody who doesn't have it. And if you're getting into trades and you got a chance of losing money, of course it's going to be uncomfortable. But you can have that discomfort in trade as well. All right. Here's some suggestions for you. Review the video. There's a lot here. There really is. There's an awful lot here, and you might want to review it a couple of times. Take some notes. list your coping strategies out and assess those costs and benefits, and just, recognize that it's, not a smart thing to keep doing something that's not working for you and that's actually costing you. That's the purpose of that. And it's, as I said before, you got to experience it. And if you really sit down and do this, you're going to have a moment there. Most likely you're going to have a moment that says, wow, nothing I have done worked. And it doesn't matter what I read, who I've talked to, what I've tried, nothing has worked. Maybe this guy is right. There's the old story of the blind man in the field. You probably haven't heard this, but blindfolded man, not a blind man, a man with a blindfold gets put in a helicopter, and he gets whisked away, and he's dropped off in a field. And just before he's dropped off, he's given a bag, and he's told, if you run into trouble, you can open this bag, and this might be helpful to you. And so he puts the bag, slings the bag across his shoulder. And remember, he's blindfolded, and he's walking across this field that he's been set down into. But the field is full of holes. And naturally, he trips and falls into one of the holes. And the hole is, he's in deeper, he's in over his head. So he takes off the blindfold, and he says, well, I'm in a fix here, so I better see what's in this bag that they gave me. And he opens up the bag, and there is a shovel. So what does he do? He starts digging. And he's digging, and he's digging, and he's digging, and he's digging. And a while later, I come along, and I hear this, sounds like somebody's digging down in this hole. So I get down on my knees, and I peer over the side, and I look down, and sure enough, there's this guy frantically digging. And I said, hey, do you need any help down there? And he stops digging, and he looks up, and he says, yeah, have you got a bigger shovel? You want to get out of the trap of what you want to stop using shovels to dig your way out of a hole. And this is what I know to be the best way to do that. And so begin to notice your thoughts and your feelings and how you get hooked into them. Spend some time doing this. Start to put mindfulness into a daily practice. Just start with 5 minutes. That's all you need to do. And let it grow. Practice diffusion. In the workbook, there's a couple of exercises to do. But you'll begin to notice, if you start to practice mindfulness, you listen to this once or twice, you start to think about this, you'll begin to diffuse from everyday things. You'll start to have thoughts about, God, I remember one of the first ones that I had was, I was still working in a medical center, and I would chronically be late to meetings. And I remember one day when mindfulness and diffusion really hit me square in the face, when I was racing to I used to work on an addictions unit, so I was racing to get to this meeting in the conference room of the addictions unit, and I was almost running people over. And I'm panting, and it was summertime, and it was humid, and I'm sweaty, and I get in, and I throw open the door, and I race in, and no one's there. Everybody else is late as well. And all the way through, I'm having these thoughts, they're going to fire me, they're going to, do all of these things, I'm so bad, I'm no good, I'm a lousy psychologist, whoever trusts anybody who can't be on time, and blah, 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 blah. The mind does this all the time. And so you'll begin to notice in everyday life, if you start to practice this and start to focus in on diffusion. Develop your list of high-value trading behaviors. We talked about it being unique for everybody. I mean, certainly there are certain common things to everybody, but some things are going to be unique. Note those down. Focus in on a couple of them that are going to bring you some, positive results. Go small. Just hold things for one more point. Take a trade for a half a point. Just if you're having difficulty, getting into a trade it for just a small amount. Go small incremental steps. Use the techniques that we talked about. Think process versus outcomes. keep a journal of this stuff. The form that I gave you kind of helps with that, but try doing that. All right. I see some good comments here. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope that you can start to apply this. And Sandra says it's best to show how to do it rather than talk about it. Yeah, and Sandra, that begins to, that's working with people one-on-one. And truthfully, I do most of the same things here if I were working with you one-on-one. And, you'll see on my website that there are certain resources. As I said, I'll send you those articles. I do blog posts, and there's mindfulness downloads that you can do, and other things, both free things and for sale things. If you're interested in working one-on-one, if this is a real difficult problem for you, here's what I'll do. Usually I work with people and I tell them it's going to take 3 to 6 months before you're going to see good, solid results, and you need to anticipate that. And it's not real expensive, but it's not cheap either. The normal fee, people typically pay 4 weeks in advance, and that fee is $650 for those 4 weeks. And if for folks who purchased this, registered for this webinar, I'll discount that even further for the first 4-week period, and I'll discount it down to $500. Excuse me, $500. Okay, instead of $650. So there's an additional savings there. No one can really show you how to do this. I can show you how to go about doing it and work with you in doing it. But in the end, it's, trading is a lone wolf business, and so is, taking steps to develop the mental side. It's got to come from you. I can show you the way, but ultimately it has to come from you. And if you're interested in the consultation thing, too, working one-on-one, contact either me or Helen. You've got my email address up here, helen@tradingpsychologyedge.com. Tell her you want a free consultation, and I'll sit down and talk with you for 30 or 45 minutes before, without charge at all, and just go, tell you a little bit more about the process if you're interested. But I'm not trying to promote that. Okay, everybody. Good. Okay, good. You got some good information. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. It's important that it is important that I get a little bit of feedback like this. All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate you coming in. I'm sorry I went overtime, as I guess I do, don't I? But I wanted to make sure you got everything. And as I said, you got everything you need to do this if you want to apply it. Not that it's not going to take work, but you've got some of the best stuff going out there. So I want to thank you all again. Thanks for listening, and thank you for being so patient. And good trading, and certainly trade mindfully. And I will see you. I'll see you all soon, I hope. Thanks again. Bye-bye now.